It's much more fun to be his friend than it is to be his enemy, because this guy is f***ing relentless.
Did you ever find out who did it?
Yeah, I know who did it shortly after.
They are now where?
The guy who actually when he's dead.
Say one nice thing about Ja Rule.
Oh, he's alive.
I was like, I'm telling you, man, y'all got a chance right now. Just flood it. Put out a lot of music because 50 Cent is coming. 4 months later, in the club hit and it was over. Now everybody got to sit on the sidelines and wait this tidal wave out.
Actually, God want a problem.
No, I don't think
I don't ever want a problem. But when they say they want a problem, I say no problem.
Okay, so this is my face. This is what Buzzbuster looks like. I've been calling out dysfunctional people without showing myself. But in this video, I can't hide. The face is new. The opinions are exactly the same. Now let's show the world who 50 Cent is.
All right, you clicked on a 4-hour documentary about 50 Cent, which means one of two things. Either you genuinely love 50 Cent and want to know every detail of his life, or you put this on because you couldn't decide what to watch, and this was the most interesting thing in the list. Either way, welcome. Settle in, because I promise you, by the time this is over, you are going to have a completely different relationship with this man's story. Because here's the thing about 50 Cent that people get wrong. Most people think they know the story. They know the shooting, they know In the Club, they know the vitamin water money, maybe the bankruptcy, maybe the feud with whoever he was beefing with that particular week. They think it's a rap story, a hip-hop success story with some drama sprinkled in. It's not. Or rather, it's so much more than that. The actual story of Curtis James Jackson III is one of the most remarkable human stories of the last 50 years.
Curtis James Jackson III, better known as 50 Cent, is a musician, actor, director, investor, and entrepreneur from the south side of Jamaica, Queens. His rags to riches story is arguably the greatest in hip-hop history. Jackson came of age during the height of the 1980s crack epidemic. He grew up without a father, and his mother was murdered when he was just 8 years old.
And I don't say that for dramatic effect. I say that because once you see the whole picture, the childhood, the losses, the shooting, the blacklisting, the comeback, the television empire, the business moves, all of it, you realize this is not a music industry story. This is a story about what a human being is capable of when they have nothing left to lose. We are going to cover everything. From the day he was born in South Jamaica, Queens in 1975, all the way through to 2026, where he somehow has a documentary about himself coming out on Hulu while simultaneously having produced a documentary about his enemy's downfall on Netflix in the same year, which is, and I need you to really appreciate this, the most 50 Cent move that has ever been pulled in the history of 50 Cent moves. But we are not starting there. We are starting at the very beginning, because if you skip the beginning of this story, nothing else makes sense. So, South Jamaica, Queens, 1975. Let's go.
Curtis, how did you pick this name?
Oh, 50 Cent?
Yeah.
That one, it was kind of a nickname given.
Why?
To me, and I used to like to play video games a lot, and I don't want to play once, I want to play twice. So I had 50 Cent, it was 25 Cent at the time, so I did it and it kind of stuck. But there's also a guy from Fort Greene Projects that has the same actual name, and I thought it was cool to use for music because it's a metaphor for change.
Okay, so before we get into the man himself, we need to spend a minute on where he came from, because where you come from shapes everything. And South Jamaica, Queens in the 1970s and 1980s was a very specific kind of place. Queens is one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. And if you only know it from the airport, which fair enough, JFK is right there, you might not realize that inside Queens is an enormous range of neighborhoods, all with completely different characters. Some of Queens looks like suburbs, tree-lined streets, nice houses, the whole thing. South Jamaica is not that part of Queens. South Jamaica in the 1970s and 1980s was one of the most economically depressed and crime-ridden neighborhoods in the entire city. And that is saying something, because New York City in the 1970s and 1980s was not a safe place in general.
This is a footage of the Bronx, NYC in 1982, lined up with current footage of the same locations in 2024. When people hear that in the 80s, crack ravaged inner cities across the country, they have no idea unless they truly look. Now, of course, New York City had been going straight downhill throughout the 70s, and this was peak devastation. But you can see videos like this and worse from there and other places. Detroit is just starting to try and recover from its lowest lows more recently.
The whole city was struggling. The fiscal crisis, white flight, urban decay, all of it. But South Jamaica was on the sharper end of that struggle. Now here's something I want you to understand. Because people sometimes romanticize poverty in a way that doesn't serve the actual people who lived through it. Growing up in South Jamaica was not a movie. It was not a training montage. It was not a setup for an inspiring story about hard work paying off. For most of the people who grew up there, it was just hard. Full stop. The crack epidemic hit New York neighborhoods like South Jamaica in the 1980s with a force that is difficult to overstate if you didn't live through it. We're talking about a drug that was cheap, addictive at a biological level that makes most other substances look mild, and perfectly designed to extract money from communities that didn't have a lot of it. The economic infrastructure of entire neighborhoods got rerouted around the crack trade. Police were everywhere. Funerals were everywhere. Children grew up navigating a kind of geography that most people watching this video have never had to think about. That is the world Curtis James Jackson III was born into on July 6, 1975.
Curtis James Jackson III, known as 50 Cent, is an American rapper, actor, and businessman that began his musical career in 1996. Jackson was born in the borough of Queens, New York City, and raised in its South Jamaica neighborhood by his mother, Sabrina. Sabrina, a drug dealer, raised Jackson until she died in a fire when Jackson was 8 years old. Jackson revealed in an interview that his mother was a lesbian. 50 Cent was expelled from school in the 10th grade for possession of crack.
And I want to be specific about what daily life in that world looked like at the ground level. Not the statistics, but the texture of it, because I think it matters for understanding the man who came out of it. Going to school in South Jamaica in the early 1980s meant walking past people who were high at 8 in the morning. It meant knowing, by name, people who had died violently. It meant understanding, before you were old enough to fully process it, that the institutions that were supposed to protect you, the police, the courts, the social safety net, had a complicated and often adversarial relationship with the people in your neighborhood. You learned early and without anyone explicitly teaching you that you were largely on your own. This is not unique to Curtis Jackson. This is the common experience of hundreds of thousands of children who grew up in neighborhoods like South Jamaica in that era. What is worth noting is what different children took from that experience. Some took despair, some took rage, some took a determined and against-the-odds commitment to conventional achievement. Curtis Jackson took something more specific, a precise and permanent attention to power, to who had it, who didn't, how it moved, and how you got more of it.
You can have a slight paranoia that helps you be aware of situations. And even in the 48 Laws of Power that Robert wrote, there's some things in there that you might feel like are evil, but you need to be aware of them because someone else's intentions might be very well what that law of power is.
From the time he was old enough to observe the world around him, he was studying that question. He is a Cancer, by the way, July 6th. Which, and I say this with zero scientific authority and full awareness that astrology is not a science, does seem to explain some things about a man who is intensely loyal to his inner circle, holds grudges for literal decades, and will go to war over perceived disrespect in a way that makes everyone around him slightly nervous. Not saying there's a connection, just saying the timing is interesting. One more thing about South Jamaica before we move on. It was not just a dangerous neighborhood. It was a neighborhood with a culture, a music culture specifically.
Queens has produced an extraordinary number of significant artists. LL Cool J from St. Albans, Salt and Pepper, A Tribe Called Quest, Run DMC from Hollis, Queens, Nas from Queensbridge. The borough had something, some combination of New York City influence and outer borough distance from it, some combination of aggression and ambition that kept producing people who could turn their experience into art that the whole world wanted to hear.
Joe, literally, I got to do The Garden with Schulte this past weekend, and I took the subway to the show because I wanted to feel it. I wanted to be in New York, put on Illmatic.
Oh, yeah.
Fucking New York State of Mind. Joe, I was ready to go, bro.
Oh, my God.
On the subway, listen to that beat.
Oh, my God.
Curtis Jackson was going to be one of them. In 1975, nobody knew that yet. There is one more thing about the Queens hip-hop lineage worth noting. All of those artists shared a quality that was distinctly different from the Brooklyn sound or the Bronx sound. Queens rappers tended to be technically precise, lyrically dense. They valued the craft of the verse in a specific way, and they carried a particular outer borough chip on their shoulder, the sense that they had to work harder to be heard because the loudest voices were always coming from somewhere else. That chip, that precision, that need to prove something, all of it is present in the way 50 Cent approaches a microphone. You can hear the burrow in him even when he is not talking about it. His mother's name was Sabrina Jackson. And before we talk about what happened to her, I want to make sure you actually know who she was, because she tends to get reduced to a plot point in 50 Cent's biography, the tragic mother who died young. And she was a real person who deserves more than that. Sabrina was sharp.
By all accounts, she was street smart, funny, fiercely independent, and completely clear-eyed about the world she was operating in. She was also, by the time Curtis was born, a drug dealer. Not because she was reckless or irresponsible, but because the drug economy in South Jamaica was one of the few real economies available to a young black woman who hadn't had access to the kind of opportunities that make other options possible. She was surviving. She was providing for her son. And from what we know, she was doing it with her eyes open.
My mother passed when I was like 8 years old. I went to live with my grandparents. And she had me when she was 15, so, you know, back then it wasn't as common as young girls have children at 15, a little more now than they did then. So at that point, she started hustling to be able to provide for me at that point. And she got killed when I was like 8 years old.
So when you say hustling, she was involved with what? She was...
Yeah, selling drugs.
Selling drugs.
Curtis never knew his father. His father was absent from the beginning, a ghost in the biographical record. Curtis has talked about this over the years with a kind of practiced blankness, like a scar that's so old you stop noticing the texture. He didn't grow up burning with rage about it, at least not in the way he's discussed it publicly. He just grew up without a father, the way millions of children do, and built himself without that piece. For the first 8 years of his life, it was Curtis and Sabrina, and whatever their circumstances, whatever the risks and pressures of the life she was living, she was there. She was the constant. She was the person he came home to. And then, when he was 8 years old, she was gone. I'm going to be straightforward with you here, because this part of the story deserves that. When Curtis Jackson was 8 years old, his mother Sabrina was murdered.
50's mother tragically passed away at the young age of 23 when he was only 8 years old. She was raising him alone and, struggling to make ends meet, turned to a life of drug dealing in order to provide for herself and her son. The crack epidemic was heavily taking over at the time, which made drug dealing a lucrative money grab. His mother died in a tragic fire, and 50 believes that it wasn't an accident.
The details are murky, and deliberately so. What is documented is that someone entered her home, laced her drink, and turned on the gas while she was sleeping. She died in her sleep. She was 29 years old. The case was never solved. No one was ever charged. There was no justice, no closure, no explanation given to the 8-year-old boy who needed one. Think about that for a second, because I think we sometimes rush past this moment in the 50 Cent story to get to the exciting parts. We want to get to the shooting, to end the club, to the vitamin water money. But this is the part that actually explains everything that comes after. An 8-year-old child had his mother taken from him in an act of violence and was told by the world, implicitly if not explicitly, that it didn't matter enough for anyone to be held accountable. That is a specific kind of lesson to learn at 8 years old. That is a specific kind of foundation to build a life on. Curtis went to live with his grandparents, Sabrina's parents, who were working-class people in South Jamaica who stepped in and did their absolute best. And that is genuinely true. They took him in, they provided stability, they gave him a home. But they couldn't undo what had happened. Nobody could. And the streets of South Jamaica were still right there, still running, still offering exactly what they had always offered to kids in exactly his situation: community, income, identity, and the particular seductive logic of a world that doesn't ask for credentials and doesn't care about your grades, only what you're willing to do and how loyal you are.
If I had one person in the world that I could give everything that I have to and I'd be comfortable with it, it'd be my grandmother. Because I know before she did anything, she'd think about me.
Right.
You know what I mean? My granddaddy, his heart is so giving that he'd give my money away. To my uncles and aunts and everybody else.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Now, and I want to be careful here, because this is not a simple thing to talk about. 50 Cent has discussed his mother's death in interviews over the years with what sounds like an almost eerie calm. Not repression exactly, more like someone who processed a loss at such a fundamental level, at such a young age, that it stopped being a wound and started being a fact, the ground beneath everything else. He has said, in various ways, that losing her made him feel like he had nothing left to lose. And if you understand that, really understand it, then almost every bold, reckless, fearless decision he makes for the next 40 years starts to make a different kind of sense. There is also a more specific way that his mother's death shaped him, that does not get discussed as much, which is the relationship it created between him and the concept of justice. His mother was murdered, and nobody was held accountable. He was shot 9 times in 2000, and nobody was held accountable. His close friend and mentor, Jam Master Jay, was murdered, and nobody was held accountable for years. The pattern is consistent, and it is formative. The official systems of justice have not, in Curtis Jackson's direct experience, delivered justice. What they have delivered is procedure, process, a performance of accountability without the substance of it. That experience produced in him a very specific approach to conflict. He handles it himself, directly, publicly, on his own terms, without waiting for an institution to validate his grievance or deliver a consequence.
Well, when you're in life-threatening situations, it makes you a little more conscious of that. You know, and the more that you are aware of your fate, the higher the probability you have a chance to live. My power is me being in business situations and being the person with the least fear at the table. And that's because I weigh these things up against my biggest losses in my life. So the loss of my mom is the biggest thing that I've experienced.
Every beef, every diss track, every Instagram post targeting someone who wronged him, you can trace it back to the same source. A child who learned that nobody was coming to settle accounts on his behalf. So he settled them himself. By the time Curtis Jackson was 12 years old, he was in the game. I want to be precise about that because it's easy to sort of skate over it when you're telling this story. He wasn't dabbling. He wasn't a lookout, not for long anyway. He was dealing drugs, crack cocaine primarily, on the streets of South Jamaica, Queens, alongside older men who had been doing it longer and who recognized in this kid what the streets always recognize: hunger, intelligence, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. And look, I'm not going to moralize about this. The people watching this video have a whole range of opinions about the drug economy and personal choices and systemic factors and all of that. What I will say is this: if you are 12 years old and you have lost your mother to violence, and you are living in a neighborhood where the primary visible economy is the drug trade, and nobody with resources is showing up to offer you something different, the drug trade is not an irrational choice. It is the obvious one. That doesn't make it right. It makes it comprehensible.
In the 1980s, one thing made Harlem well known. That is, the epidemic of crack. It had a tremendous effect. The 1980s crack epidemic had a major and fatal effect on Harlem's hoods, leaving a lasting mark on the neighborhood. Particularly affected areas included Sugar Hill, East Harlem, and Central Harlem. The introduction of crack cocaine increased crime, violence, and addiction, upsetting the lives of locals. The drug entered every area of daily life in Harlem, tearing apart families. Addiction destroyed families, causing strained relationships, neglect, and disappointment. Children who grew up in violent and unstable surroundings often found themselves caught in the crossfire.
Curtis was good at it. He was careful, or tried to be. He was observant. The specific skills the drug economy required of him are worth naming because they are the same skills that made him exceptional in every subsequent arena. You had to read people fast.
You had to assess in seconds whether someone was trustworthy, whether a situation was safe, whether a deal was what it appeared to be. You had to maintain relationships that were transactional while acting like they were personal. You had to manage multiple competing interests simultaneously without letting any of the players know you were managing them. You had to be patient enough to wait for the right moment and decisive enough to move the instant it arrived. None of that goes away when the product changes. When Curtis Jackson moved from selling on corners to selling records, to selling television, to selling spirits, to selling his own life story to Hulu, he was applying the same fundamental skill set to different products in different markets. The context changed completely. The underlying capabilities did not. The streets of South Jamaica were, in this sense, a very expensive and very effective business school. The tuition was paid in years of danger and legal risk and proximity to violence. The curriculum was applied psychology, risk assessment, negotiation, and relationship management. He graduated. He had the same quality that would later make him excellent at every other thing he did. He was always watching, always learning, always calculating what the situation required and positioning himself accordingly.
You're not making money until you're making money when you're not working. I didn't make no money when I didn't do a show. You see what I'm saying? I had to work to get the money every time. When I'm not in the show, and the show is still, they're going, how you keep yourself off your own show? Oh, they don't understand that.
Right.
I'm like, cause this motherfucker on automatic pilot.
Right.
It don't require me on this motherfucker but to keep going.
He was also simultaneously getting seriously interested in rap. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, great. He found music and it saved him from the streets. That's the story, right? Except it's more complicated than that. And the more complicated version is actually more interesting. Because Curtis Jackson was not choosing between the streets and music. He was doing both at the same time for years. He was dealing and writing. He was on corners and in studios. He was fully in both worlds simultaneously, and somehow keeping them from destroying each other. The artists he was listening to were the ones who made sense of the world he was living in. Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G., who had grown up in Brooklyn, not far in geography, but miles away in some other sense, and who had turned the specific details of street life into storytelling that felt cinematic and epic and true all at once. Jay-Z, who was already showing New York that you could be a rapper and a businessman, that the creative and the entrepreneurial weren't separate things. Nas, who was from Queens specifically, from Queensbridge, and who had made one of the greatest debut albums in the history of hip-hop with Illmatic, which, if you haven't heard it, please, right after this, go listen to it. We'll still be here when you get back. Curtis was absorbing all of it, building a style, developing a voice that was from the beginning unlike anyone else's, a kind of flat, unhurried confidence that sounds like it does not particularly care whether you are impressed or not, which is paradoxically.
What about top three? Jay-Z, Kendrick, Nas, top three. Is that about right or not?
No. Still good artists, but not of all time, no.
Who should be number one?
I don't know. To me, how do you not look at the number one selling artist? I'm thinking about M when I'm saying that. There are no Lamborghinis and Ferraris for you to buy from hip-hop culture if there's no consumer base. Right now, there'll be guys at home who go, oh, 50 just loves Eminem so much. Yeah, love him to death.
One of the most impressive things you can sound like. The specific way Curtis Jackson absorbed music in this period is worth describing because it was not passive listening. He was studying.
He was transcribing. He was writing his own verses in response to what he heard, testing himself against the people he admired, figuring out where he was similar and where he was different. And what he found, working through Biggie's catalog and Jay-Z's early albums and Nas's Illmatic, was that the thing that made all of them special was the same thing: specificity. Not general statements about the street life, specific details, the names of specific things, the textures of specific experiences that felt so real and so precisely observed that you felt you were there, even if you had never been anywhere near it. He filed that away. Everything he wrote from that point forward would carry that commitment to the specific over the general. He was also, during this period, developing a performing persona that was distinct from his writing persona. The voice on the page was intricate and detailed. The voice on the mic was something different. Something that reduced all of that detail into a delivery that felt effortless, like he was not trying at all. That gap between the work that went into it and the ease with which it came out was something he cultivated deliberately. He did not want to look like he was working. He wanted to look like it was natural, because the most powerful position in any competitive arena is the one where your effort is invisible and your results are undeniable.
I watched the little say, he ain't got no bodies. That ain't even like that. He not putting work in. He not running around doing. The definition of gangster, when you have a clear definition of it, right, is you're choosing to do things his way. It can be outside of the parameters of even what the justice system says is right. It's gangster because he's choosing his own path and doing it his way.
That was, from the beginning, unlike anyone else's, a kind of flat, unhurried confidence that sounds like it doesn't particularly care whether you're impressed or not.
Which is, paradoxically, one of the most impressive things you can sound like. On June 29, 1994, Curtis Jackson was 19 years old, and he was arrested for selling crack cocaine to an undercover police officer, which, let's just acknowledge, is a thing that happens to a lot of people who are doing exactly what he was doing. The undercover operation that caught him was not unusual. The charge was not unusual. The trajectory from where he was to this moment was, unfortunately, not unusual at all. He was arrested again 3 weeks later when police searched his home and found crack cocaine, heroin,
and a starter pistol. The starter pistol detail always gets me because a starter pistol is technically not a firearm. It fires blanks, it's used to start races, and yet there it is in his apartment alongside actual narcotics, and somehow that's the least alarming item on the list.
After his mother's death, Jackson moved into his grandparents' house with his 8 aunts and uncles. At age 12, Jackson began dealing narcotics. In 1994, Jackson was arrested for selling 4 vials of cocaine to an undercover police officer. He was arrested again 3 weeks later when police searched his home and found heroin, 10 ounces of crack cocaine, and a starting pistol. Although Jackson was sentenced to 3 to 9 years in prison, he served only 6 months in a boot camp.
He was charged seriously. He was sentenced to 3 to 9 years in prison. He ended up serving 6 months in a shock incarceration boot camp, a military-style program that the New York State prison system used at the time as an alternative to longer sentences for younger offenders. It was intense. It was designed to be. Early mornings, physical training, discipline, the whole program. It was not comfortable. While he was there, he earned his GED, his high school equivalency diploma. Now, I want to say something about that GED that I think gets undersold.
Getting your GED in a boot camp program when you are a teenager who never prioritized school, in an environment that is designed to be physically and mentally exhausting, while processing what your life has become and what it might become, that is not nothing. That requires a specific kind of focus. And it tells you something about Curtis Jackson that he found that focus even there. He came out of the boot camp in 1994 with his certificate, with his life technically intact, and with an extremely clear understanding of something that a lot of people learn too late. The game has a ceiling, and the ceiling is a cell. And the only way to avoid it is to find a different game.
When did you get jailed? When were you called out with this stuff?
Well, when I got to high school, my first year, I got arrested at school.
And you went to jail for how long?
The first time, it wasn't a long time. I just, because it was a juvenile situation. And then the second time, I was going for 7 months.
He did not immediately leave the streets. Let's be honest. Nobody walks out of a boot camp in South Jamaica, Queens in 1994 and immediately reinvents their life. That's not how it works. But something had shifted. The music was pulling harder. The pen and the notebook were getting more time. And he was starting to think, seriously, not as fantasy, about whether rap could be the thing. The boot camp experience itself is worth a moment of attention because it shows up in his music and in his personality in ways that are easy to miss if you don't know it happened. Military-style discipline, the early mornings, the physical regimen, the emphasis on hierarchy and following orders can break some people. In others, it instills a structural quality, a capacity for sustained effort and delayed gratification that they carry long after the specific context is gone.
Curtis Jackson came out of that boot camp with something like operational discipline. He was always going to outwork people. He was always going to put in the hours that others were not willing to put in. The music he went on to make, especially the mixtape volume of the early 2000s, reflects that capacity. You do not produce that much material at that level of quality without having internalized something about sustained effort. He was also coming out of the boot camp, 19 years old, and very aware of the specific arithmetic of the life he had been living. The people who stayed in the game from his neighborhood, the ones who did not get out, were ending up in one of two places: prison or dead. He had already gotten a preview of the prison option. He did not want the other one. The music was not just a passion, it was an exit ramp, and he was looking for every on-ramp he could find. The man who helped him find out was Jam Master Jay. If you know anything about the history of hip-hop, you know that name. Jam Master Jay was the DJ for Run DMC, one of the founding groups of the entire genre, the people who helped turn rap music from a New York underground phenomenon into a global commercial force in the 1980s. He was a legend, a genuine, undisputed legend. He was also, by the mid-1990s, running a recording studio and a label called JMJ Records out of Queens, and he had a habit of finding young talent and helping them develop, not in a flashy industry showcase kind of way, but in a quiet, craft-focused, sit down and let me teach you kind of way.
He found Curtis Jackson, or Curtis found him. The details of the introduction vary depending on who's telling the story, but what's consistent is what came after. Jam Master Jay took Curtis seriously as a rapper, when a lot of people in the industry would have seen a street kid from Queens with a drug arrest on his record and made a very quick assessment about where that story was going. Jay taught him how to structure a song,
how to count bars, how to move from freestyling, from the raw instinctive ability Curtis clearly had, into actual craft. The difference between freestyling and writing a song that holds together from beginning to end is significant, and it's a skill that has to be developed. Jam Master Jay was patient with that process in a way that clearly mattered to the younger man. Jay also taught him something that doesn't get talked about as much, which is how to be in the music business, how to carry yourself in rooms with label people, how to protect yourself legally, how to think about the industry as a system to be navigated rather than a meritocracy that will simply reward good music. Coming from where he came from, Curtis had excellent instincts for reading people and situations. He had developed those instincts in environments where misreading someone could get you hurt. But the music business has its own specific grammar, and Jam Master Jay helped him learn it. Curtis has spoken about Jay with consistent warmth and respect throughout the years.
When Jam Master Jay was shot and killed in his recording studio in October 2002, another unsolved murder, by the way, in a story that has more unsolved murders in it than you might expect, Curtis took it hard. The death of another figure who had believed in him, gone before justice could arrive. A pattern that had started with his mother and showed no signs of stopping. The murder of Jam Master Jay remains officially unsolved, though arrests were made in 2020 and the case moved toward trial years later. We won't go deep on it here because it is its own long story. But it is worth noting that this is not the last time Curtis Jackson will lose someone close to him in unexplained violence, and it is not the last time the justice system will fail to provide resolution in the time frame that would actually help. Jam Master Jay also gave Curtis something that had been largely absent from his life since he was 8 years old, a legitimate male mentor who showed up consistently and invested in him without a hidden agenda. The music world was full of men who wanted something from young talent. Managers who took too much, promoters who paid too little, industry figures who made promises they did not keep. Jay was different. He wanted Curtis to be excellent because that is what he wanted for any artist he worked with. That experience of someone believing in you because you had demonstrated you were worth believing in was formative in ways that went beyond music craft. And the case moved toward trial years later. We won't go deep on it here because it is its own long story. But it is worth noting that this is not the last time Curtis Jackson will lose someone close to him in unexplained violence, and it is not the last time the justice system will fail to provide resolution in the time frame that would actually help. By 1996, he was pursuing music professionally. By 1998 and 1999, he was shopping demos to labels, and in 1999, he got the call that would change everything, for about a year anyway, before a man with a gun would come along and very nearly change everything back. In 1999, Curtis James Jackson III signed with Columbia Records, and if you know anything about the music industry, you know that Columbia Records is not a small deal. Columbia is one of the oldest and most storied labels in American music. Not just hip-hop, music generally. They have signed everyone from Miles Davis to Bruce Springsteen to Beyonce. Getting signed to Columbia means that you passed through multiple layers of gatekeeping, and someone at the top of a very large food chain decided that you had something worth investing in. For a kid from South Jamaica who had been dealing drugs at 12 and sitting in a boot camp at 19, this was a legitimately surreal development. He got to work. He spent 1999 and into the year 2000 recording his debut album, which was called Power of the Dollar. He was not making soft music. He was not diluting himself for mainstream radio in a way that might have been commercially safer. He was making exactly the kind of music he had in him. Hard, specific, street level, with hooks sharp enough to cut through and verses dense enough to reward repeated listens. A release date was scheduled. The machinery of a major label, the marketing, the radio promotion, the press was starting to line up behind this guy. And then an extraordinary thing happened, which was that Nas, Nasir Jones, who is from Queensbridge and is one of the most respected and critically revered rappers in the history of the genre, agreed to appear on a track with a young Columbia signee. If you were building a rollout for a debut rap album in 1999, a Nas feature was essentially a public endorsement from one of the most credible voices in the culture. It was someone saying, "This person is real. I'm putting my name on it." Everything was pointing up. Everything was aligning. And then, on May 24th, 2000, outside his grandmother's house in South Jamaica, Queens, at approximately 9 in the morning, a man walked up to Curtis James Jackson III and shot him, and then shot him again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again,
and again, 9 times. I need you to stay with me here, because this is the moment around which the entire rest of the story orbits. Everything before this point is context. Everything after this point is response. On May 24, 2000, Curtis Jackson was sitting in a car outside his grandmother's house in Queens. A man approached the vehicle and opened fire at close range. Curtis was hit 9 times, in the hand, in both legs,
and once in the face. A bullet entered through his left cheek, grazed his tongue, and exited the other side. He was taken to Jamaica Hospital. He survived. Now, when I say he survived, I want to make sure we're not breezing past that. Surviving 9 gunshot wounds is not a given. People die from 1 gunshot wound. They die from wounds that look less serious. The fact that Curtis Jackson is alive, the fact that he went on to make music and television and business deals and beef with half of hip-hop for the next 2.5 decades is not something that should be taken as inevitable. There are 100 versions of this story where he doesn't survive. He survived.
Some people know how to live better than others with or without money. They just sort out and pick a better person to share their time with. You feel what I'm saying? Even if you sleep in a 1-bedroom apartment, then you may be richer than a rich guy. You see what I'm saying? Your life, the fabric of your life and what you're doing and how you feel about yourself at the moment.
The one that actually happened. The shooter's identity has been the subject of much discussion over the years. The name most commonly connected to it in street lore is Daryl Baum, a man with his own set of associations and connections in that world, who was himself killed approximately 3 weeks after the shooting. But officially, no one was ever charged. No one was ever prosecuted. The case, like so many cases in the world Curtis Jackson grew up in, was never resolved. He spent time recovering, weeks of physical pain, surgeries, rehabilitation. The specific detail of what physical recovery from 9 gunshot wounds actually involves is worth spending a moment on, because the story has a tendency to jump past it. We get the shooting, we get the survival, and then the next scene is him in the studio. The reality was months of being in a bed, months of limited mobility.
Months of depending on other people for basic things when you have spent your entire life depending on nobody. For someone with Curtis Jackson's specific relationship to control and self-sufficiency, the physical helplessness of that recovery period must have been its own particular form of torture. He has said in interviews that he used the recovery time to write, that the notebook came out while he was in bed, and he started putting down everything that was in his head. All of the anger about the shooting, about the industry response, about what had happened and what it meant. The recovery period, in other words, is where a significant amount of the energy that powered the 2001 and 2002 mixtapes came from. He turned the bed into a studio. He turned the pain into material. It is one of the most efficient conversions of negative experience into creative output in the history of popular music. Some of the bullets are still in his body today, lodged in places where the surgical risk of removing them is greater than the risk of leaving them in. So when people talk about 50 Cent's relationship to the shooting, understand that it is not purely historical for him. It is, in a literal physical sense, still with him every single day. Now, here is where the industry comes in. And I want you to really pay attention to this part, because how you feel about it probably says something about how you feel about the music business in general. Columbia Records, watching from the sidelines as one of their newly signed artists recovered from 9 gunshot wounds, made a business decision. They dropped him. Power of the Dollar was shelved. The album was never released, and it got worse. Word went out through the industry, through the informal networks of A&Rs and labeled executives and radio programmers, that this artist was radioactive, that signing him came with complications, that playing his music was not worth the trouble. He was, in the polite language of the industry, not considered a priority. So let's just be precise about what happened here. A man survived being shot 9 times, and the industry response was, "We don't want you anymore." And I want to dwell on that for a second, because I think it's one of the genuinely revealing moments in this entire story. Not what Curtis did, but what the industry did, because the industry's response tells you everything about how the music business works, and everything about why 50 Cent's relationship to that business for the rest of his career was always transactional rather than trusting. Columbia Records did not drop Curtis Jackson because his music got worse. They dropped him because having him on the roster became a liability, because the shooting signaled to the people making decisions at a corporate level that this artist came with complications that could affect the label's relationships with radio, with retail, with other artists. The decision was purely about risk management. It had nothing to do with whether the music was good. It had nothing to do with whether Curtis Jackson deserved a shot. It was a cold business calculation, and he was on the wrong side of it.
Now, I am not going to tell you that music executives are villains for making business decisions. That is how businesses work. But I am going to tell you that when you are 24 years old and you just survived 9 gunshot wounds, and the first call you get from your label is effectively, "Good luck with everything. We're going to need you to leave," that leaves a mark. That shapes how you approach every business relationship you have for the rest of your life. He was 24 years old, blacklisted by the music industry, still recovering physically with bullets literally still in his body. Most people in that situation would stop. Most people would take it as the universe sending a very direct and unambiguous message.
I love him.
Why?
Yeah, just because he gave me my opportunity. I wouldn't even be here, babe.
What are the conversations that you guys have when you catch up?
We talk about everything. Kids, everything. He didn't want to go on tour big. I showed him a layout. We could have went on tour, me, M, Dre, Snoop.
What was that?
You do not believe how much money.
I know, bro.
M was like, I just don't want to go on tour and come back.
And honestly, most people would be forgiven for stopping. There is no shame in looking at the situation and deciding that the cost is too high. Curtis Jackson did not stop. Before the shooting, before Columbia, there was something else already building. A conflict that would, over the next several years, reshape the landscape of hip-hop and turn Curtis Jackson from an industry outcast into the most talked-about rapper in the world, his beef with Ja Rule. Now, if you're under a certain age, you might not fully appreciate the context here, so let me give it to you. Ja Rule, born Jeffrey Atkins from Hollis, Queens, was in 2000 and 2001 one of the hottest rappers in America. He had a formula that worked extraordinarily well. Tough guy verses with smooth, melodic, sometimes romantic hooks. He was selling millions of records. He was filling arenas.
He was doing duets with Jennifer Lopez and Ashanti. He was everywhere. He was also, in the estimation of Curtis Jackson, completely fake. The origins of the beef are disputed. There are multiple versions floating around, and anyone who tells you they know exactly what started it is probably being generous with the truth. One version involves a stolen chain. Another involves accumulated slights and mutual disrespect over time in the Queens music scene. Another involves the specific political dynamics of Murder Inc. Records, Ja Rule's label, and its connections to people who had connections to people who had connections to the event that changed Curtis's life on May 24th, 2000. Whatever the origin, and it was probably a combination of all of the above, what matters is what Curtis did with it after the shooting. The specific landscape of New York hip-hop in 2001 matters here because the beef was not happening in a vacuum. This was the era of rap beef as genre, as sport, as the primary mechanism of credibility establishment. Every major artist of that period had active conflicts. Jay-Z and Nas had one of the most celebrated and analyzed beefs in the history of the art form running simultaneously. The culture was structured around conflict as proof of authenticity, around the idea that a rapper who refused to fight was a rapper who had something to hide. 50 Cent understood this dynamic completely and used it to his advantage. He was not starting fights out of ego alone. He was engaging in the dominant social mechanism of his industry and doing it better than almost anyone else.
There is also something specific about the Ja Rule conflict that distinguished it from a typical rap beef, which is that 50 Cent genuinely believed in what he was saying. He was not manufacturing a controversy for attention. He believed, on the basis of things he knew and things he had experienced, that the image Ja Rule was selling was false, and his commitment to saying so publicly at real personal risk gave the attacks a quality that the audience responded to. You can tell the difference in hip-hop between someone who is beefing strategically and someone who is genuinely angry. The second kind is always more compelling. Curtis Jackson in 2001 and 2002 was the second kind. He made music about it, extremely direct, extremely specific, extremely unforgiving music about it. He went after Ja Rule's street credibility, the one thing a rapper cannot afford to lose. He was saying, this man is performing toughness. He is not actually tough. I am from the same neighborhoods. I know the real story, and here is what it actually is. Now, doing this was not a safe choice. Murder Inc. was not simply a record label. The connections were real, and real in a way that had physical consequences. Curtis Jackson was making enemies of people who could make his already precarious situation significantly worse. He kept going anyway. And this is something you are going to see over and over again in this story. A rational person, given the situation Curtis was in, would have found the safest available path.
Curtis Jackson, every single time, took the exact opposite of the safest available path. Not because he was reckless, not because he was stupid, but because he had internalized somewhere very deep the lesson that backing down doesn't actually protect you. The only thing that protects you is making yourself impossible to ignore. Here is where we get to the part of the story that, if you are a fan of music or marketing or just human ingenuity, is genuinely thrilling to think about. Curtis Jackson, with no label, no radio play, no industry support, and an active beef with people who had reasons to want him gone, made a decision that was completely counterintuitive by the standards of the time. He started giving music away for free. Starting in 2001 and accelerating through 2002, he released mixtape after mixtape. Not one, not two, multiple projects a year, flowing out into the world at a pace that nobody else was matching. He was rapping over other people's beats, popular beats, beats that belonged to successful artists, and releasing the results for free on CDs that he was distributing directly to barbershops, to record stores, to neighborhoods, to anyone who would take one. He would literally show up places with CDs and hand them to people, by hand, one at a time. Think about what that takes. Not just the work of recording the music, which is itself enormous, the humility and the hustle to then physically go to places and hand people your CD and say, listen to this, the willingness to be told no.
The patience to keep going when the industry that was supposed to be your pathway had closed the door in your face. And the music was good. That matters. This wasn't just a marketing strategy deployed by someone with decent songs. The music was hard and sharp and real in a way that cut through immediately. He was rapping about the shooting. He was rapping about the industry that had abandoned him. He was rapping about Ja Rule with the specificity that people who followed hip-hop found riveting. And he was doing all of it with an ease and an assurance that made you feel like he wasn't trying, like this was just how he talked, and the beats just happened to be underneath it. The street reputation grew fast. In a world before social media, before Twitter, before Instagram, before YouTube, word of mouth was the only algorithm that mattered. And word of mouth was saying the same thing in barbershops and on corners, from Queens to the Bronx to Brooklyn. You need to hear this guy. There were multiple notable mixtape releases during this period. Guess Who's Back in 2002 is the one everyone talks about because of what it led to. But the whole body of work from this era is a study in how to build an audience without permission, how to create demand before supply, how to become undeniable. Let me also tell you something about what this mixtape era meant culturally, because I think it gets underestimated in hindsight. People sometimes talk about it as just a marketing strategy, a clever way to build buzz before the real album. But it was more than that.
It was a demonstration of a philosophy that Curtis Jackson has applied to every area of his life and career. You don't need permission from the gatekeepers if you build your own door. The record industry in 2001 and 2002 was built around control. Labels controlled distribution. Radio controlled airplay. Magazines controlled coverage. If you didn't have access to those pipelines, conventional wisdom said you couldn't build a career. Curtis Jackson proved that conventional wisdom wrong. Years before the internet made it easy to prove it wrong. He built a direct pipeline to the audience, messy, physical, one CD at a time. And when the industry eventually came back to him, he came back from a position of strength, not desperation. That matters. It matters for understanding everything he does afterward. Because 50 Cent never forgot that he built something without the industry's help. And that knowledge gave him a leverage in every negotiation, every deal, every conflict he ever entered. He knew on a cellular level that he did not need them as much as they thought he did. He was also, during this entire period, still alive, which sounds like a low bar. But given the environment and the enemies and the events of May 2000, it was worth noting. He was moving carefully. He had people around him, a crew that was forming and tightening, guys from Queens who were with him and who would eventually become the core of G-Unit. We will get into G-Unit in detail in part 2. For now, just know that he was not doing this alone.
G Unit, the guerrilla unit.
The name itself tells you something about the mindset. The core of what would become G Unit was forming around Curtis during this period. Lloyd Banks, Ryan Daniel Glover, was one of his closest friends from Queens, someone who had been in the music with him from early on and whose lyrical ability was genuinely impressive, even next to someone as dominant as 50 Cent. Tony Yayo, Marvin Bernard, was another day one, another Queens native, someone who had been there from before the deals and the shooting and all of it. These were not business relationships. These were people he had grown up with, people who knew the full story, people who were in it before there was anything to be in. The loyalty ran in both directions and was forged in circumstances that make most professional relationships look like casual acquaintances. G Unit, even in its informal early form, operated with a discipline and a hierarchy that reflected the world its members had come from. There were rules, there were expectations around loyalty, there was a clear sense of who was in and who was out. These are qualities that can be ruthless when applied between adults in an industry, and we will get to some of those moments. But they are also qualities that kept people alive in South Jamaica, Queens. Curtis was building something.
Until you have enough success that you start to create lifestyle around it, you don't even have those. Like my grandmother, the first thing I did when I did the deal was I bought her a small Mercedes-Benz, like the C-Class Mercedes-Benz, and I left on a tour. That was my only expense, that car and that $800 month. By the time I came back, I had $38 million. A journalist told me about mics. I said I should buy it. Then went and saw it and looked at it. And I bought it because, you know, when you make $38 million, if you don't spend it, the IRS is just coming to take it anyway.
With the mixtapes, with the crew, with the relentless output and the slowly growing reputation, he was building towards something, even if he couldn't have told you exactly what it was going to look like.
And in 2002, it came together in a way that nobody, not even him, could have fully anticipated. In 2002, a copy of Guess Who's Back, or material from the mixtape circuit that contained similar music, reached a recording studio in Detroit. The person who heard it first was Eminem, and Eminem could not stop listening. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is a documentary about 50 Cent, not about Eminem. And Eminem is not the main character of the story. He is a catalyst, an important one, but let's not lose the thread. What matters is this: Eminem heard the tape, recognized that he was listening to something genuinely rare, and brought it to Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre, one of the most successful producers in the history of popular music, a man who had shaped the sound of an era and who had one of the most reliable ears for talent the industry had ever produced, listened, and he agreed. Within weeks, conversations were happening. Within months, a deal was on the table. Curtis Jackson, the man Columbia had dropped, the man that industry had blacklisted, the man who had been shot 9 times and left to figure it out, was being offered a deal with Shady Records, an imprint of Aftermath Entertainment distributed through Interscope. One of the most powerful structures in music now pointed directly at him. The deal was reportedly worth around $1 million up front. For a man who had been handing out CDs by hand on street corners, that number has a particular resonance. But I want to say something about this moment that I think gets lost in how it's usually told.
The Eminem and Dre cosign is often framed as the thing that made 50 Cent. Like he was a diamond in the rough that needed someone famous to find him and say, look, here it is. That is not the complete picture. By the time Eminem heard that tape, Curtis Jackson had already built something. He had already created an audience, a real one, loyal, street level, built one handshake at a time. He had already demonstrated that he could produce high-quality music at volume without any infrastructure. He had already survived everything the world had thrown at him and come out the other side still making music. Eminem and Dre did not create 50 Cent. They recognized what was already there and gave it a platform big enough for the rest of the world to see it too. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. The album they were now going to record together was called Get Rich or Die Trying. It would be released on February 6, 2003. It would sell 872,000 copies in its first week. It will go on to sell more than 30 million copies worldwide. The lead single, In the Club, produced primarily by Dr. Dre, would sit at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 9 consecutive weeks and would win the Grammy for Best Rap Solo Performance. It would become one of the most recognizable songs in the history of popular music, the kind of song that if you play the first 3 seconds of it in a crowded room, every single person in that room would know exactly what it was. But that is part 2. For right now, in the fall of 2002, Curtis Jackson is 27 years old.
He has 9 bullets in his body, some of them literally, physically still there. He has just signed one of the most significant record deals of the year. He has a crew around him. He has a sound that nobody else sounds like. He has survived the loss of his mother. He has survived the loss of the Columbia deal. He has survived the shooting. He has survived the blacklisting. He has survived everything. And he has not even started yet. In part 2, we are going to cover 2003, the year that 50 Cent became inescapable. We're going to talk about what it actually looked like and felt like when that album dropped and the world had to figure out what to do with him. We're going to get into G-Unit properly and the formation of what became one of the most commercially dominant rap crews of the decade. And we are going to get into the beefs, the real ones, the ones with teeth, and explain exactly why a man who had already survived so much kept choosing to fight every battle he found. That's coming in part 2. Thanks for watching part 1. We're just getting started. But before we get there, I want to take a second and step back with you, because I think it's worth pausing at the end of this first chapter and actually sitting with what we just went through. Because when you list it out, it sounds almost fictional. By the time Curtis Jackson is 27 years old and signing with Shady Records, here is what has happened to him. His mother was murdered when he was 8. He grew up without a father in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in New York City.
He started dealing drugs before he was a teenager. He was arrested at 19 and sent to a military-style boot camp. He was signed to a major label and had that deal ripped away from him after he was shot 9 times. He was blacklisted by the entire industry. He spent 2 years building a grassroots audience with no infrastructure, no support, and no guarantee that any of it was going to lead anywhere. And he still had bullets in his body. Literally. Still does, actually. Some of the rounds from May 24, 2000 are still lodged in tissue in his body today because removing them surgically carries more risk than leaving them in. So when people say 50 Cent carries the weight of his past with him, that is, in the most literal possible sense, true. Now, here's the question I always come back to when I think about this part of his life. And it's a question that doesn't have a clean answer, but I think it's worth sitting with anyway. How much of what made 50 Cent great was the talent, the actual raw material of the man, the intelligence and the ear and the instinct for what works? And how much of it was the loss? How much did the death of his mother, the absence of his father, the shooting, the blacklisting, how much did all of that forge something in him that couldn't have been forged any other way? I'm not asking that question to romanticize trauma. Trauma is not a gift. It does not automatically produce greatness. The overwhelming majority of people who go through what Curtis Jackson went through do not come out the other side as 50 Cent. They come out struggling, or they don't come out at all. The story of South Jamaica, Queens is full of people who had just as much potential and just as much reason to fight and who didn't make it. What I am saying is that the specific shape of 50 Cent, the particular combination of fearlessness and calculation, of emotional flatness and artistic fire, of willingness to escalate and willingness to be patient, that shape was carved by everything he went through. You cannot separate the man from the formation, and the formation was brutal. So when we get to part 2, and we start talking about his commercial success, and his beefs, and his business moves, I want you to keep this part 1 in your head, because every bold move he makes, every time he picks a fight he doesn't have to pick, every time he turns down the safe path, every time he bets on himself when no one else is betting on him, it's coming from this. It's coming from the kid who lost his mother at 8 and learned that the world is not going to protect you. So you had better figure out how to protect yourself. That is the foundation. Everything else is built on top of it. Part 2 is going to be a very different energy. Faster, louder, more chaotic. Because 2003 was a very different energy. The album is about to come out. In the Club is about to exist in the world. And the 50 Cent era, the actual commercial and cultural peak of his rap career, is about to begin. Stick with us. Part 2 starts right now. So, the deal is signed. The studio sessions have started.
Eminem and Dre are in the room. The beats are coming together, and Curtis Jackson, the
The man who spent 2 years handing out mixtapes by hand on street corners is now recording what will become his major label debut at one of the most well-resourced facilities in the music industry. The change in circumstances from where we left him in 2001 to where he is now in late 2002 is so extreme that it is worth just stopping for a second and acknowledging how strange that must have felt. 18 months earlier, he was blacklisted and broke and still recovering from 9 gunshot wounds. Now, he is in the studio with 2 of the most powerful producers in music, with a record label infrastructure behind him, with a deal that is going to give him a platform he built himself the long way around. He did not waste it, not a single day of it. Get Rich or Die Trying was released on February 6th, 2003. It sold 872,000 copies in its first week. Now, I want you to sit with that number for a second, because in 2023, 2024, 2025, in the streaming era, album sales numbers were completely differently, and first week figures don't mean what they used to mean. So let me translate that 872,000 for you. In 2003, selling 872,000 copies of a rap album in 1 week was extraordinary. It was one of the fastest selling hip-hop debuts in history. It beat the first week sales of almost every major rap debut that had come before it. For context, this was a debut. First album.
From a man who had 18 months earlier been blacklisted and left for dead by the industry that was now watching those sales numbers come in and quietly reconsidering every decision they'd made. The album went on to sell over 12 million copies in the United States, over 30 million worldwide. It is one of the best-selling rap albums ever made. Not the best-selling debut, not the best-selling album of that year, one of the best-selling rap albums in the history of the genre. And the Columbia Records executives who dropped him watched all of that happen from the sideline, which is, I don't want to be petty, but satisfying to think about. The lead single from the album was In the Club, and I know you know this song. I don't care who you are, I don't care what your relationship to hip-hop is. I don't care if you were alive in 2003 or not. You know this song. You have heard those opening 8 seconds. You know exactly what comes next. That is the test of a truly iconic record. You can identify it from the first breath of it.
Almost Tender, a song about whether the person you're with would be there if the money and the fame were gone, which, coming from a man who had actually experienced having everything stripped away, had a weight to it that felt completely genuine.
I watched the little saying, he ain't got no bodies. That ain't even like that. He not putting work in. He not running around doing. The definition of gangster, when you have a clear definition of it, right, is you're choosing to do things his way. It can be outside of the parameters of even what the justice system says is right. It's gangster because he's choosing his own path and doing it his way.
21 Questions went to number 1 too. 2 singles from the debut album, both number 1 in 2003.
The existence of 21 Questions as the second single is underappreciated in terms of what it revealed about 50 Cent's understanding of his own career. The easy choice, the safe choice, would have been to follow In the Club with another hard street record. Give the audience more of what they just said they wanted. Most artists in his position would have done exactly that. He did not. He released a song that was almost the opposite of In the Club in its emotional texture. And he was right that the audience would respond. The song went to number 1 in its second week on the chart and stayed near the top for months. It revealed a strategic instinct that went beyond making good music. He understood that range was an asset, that showing the audience different dimensions of yourself kept them more engaged than giving them the same dimension at higher volume. In 2003, if you turned on the radio, there was a meaningful chance you were going to hear 50 Cent. If you went to a club, there was a meaningful chance you were going to hear 50 Cent. If you turned on MTV, when MTV still played music videos, which feels like talking about a different geological era at this point, you were going to see 50 Cent. He was inescapable. Not in the overused way that word gets applied to popular artists, actually genuinely inescapable. The year 2003 belongs to him in a way that very few years in music belong to any single artist. Let me try to give you a feel for what that actually meant if you were alive and paying attention in 2003. This was before streaming, before Spotify,
Before you could just skip the songs you didn't want to hear, radio still had enormous cultural power, and radio was playing in the club constantly. You didn't choose to hear it, you just heard it at the gym, in your friend's car, in the grocery store, at every party. The song became part of the ambient soundtrack of that year in a way that no algorithm was capable of manufacturing. It just happened because the song was undeniable. And the image that went with it was equally impossible to ignore. 50 Cent had a physical presence that was genuinely unusual for the music industry. He had been working out seriously during his recovery from the shooting and continued afterward with an intensity that showed. The magazine covers, the music video appearances, the live performances, the visual was as striking as the audio. He looked like someone who had survived something, because he had. And that quality came through in every frame. His story was also a publicist's dream, which sounds cynical but is simply true. The shooting, the blacklisting, the comeback, it was a narrative arc that wrote itself. Every interview in 2003 had a built-in dramatic structure, and 50 Cent was an exceptional interview subject. Direct, unfiltered, occasionally funny in a dry and unexpected way, and completely uninterested in giving the diplomatic non-answers that most artists in his position would have defaulted to. He said what he thought about the industry, about his competitors, about his past, and people could not stop watching.
While 50 Cent was dominating the charts, G-Unit was being formalized as a group. And I want to spend some real time on G-Unit because they tend to get compressed into a footnote in the 50 Cent story. All right, the guys he rapped with, when in reality, they were central to everything that happened in this era. And understanding the group helps you understand why certain things later fell apart the way they did. The core was Lloyd Banks, Tony Ayo, and 50 Cent. Lloyd Banks, real name Ryan Daniel Glover, was from South Jamaica, had known Curtis for years, and was a genuinely exceptional rapper in his own right. His wordplay was intricate, his delivery was smooth, and he had the kind of pen that critics who dismissed G-Unit as pure street rap tended to quietly overlook. Tony Ayo, Marvin Bernard, was another day one, another South Jamaica kid, another person who had been there before any of the success and who represented a loyalty that went beyond professional obligation. Young Buck, David Darnell Brown, came in from Nashville, Tennessee, and brought a Southern energy to a crew that was very specifically a New York product. He had a rawness and an aggression that complemented the more polished delivery of Banks, and he was, for a period, genuinely excellent. His contributions to G-Unit projects in the early years were significant. There was also Tony Ayo's situation to deal with. He was actually incarcerated during much of G-Unit's commercial peak, serving time on a weapons charge. So while the group was selling millions of records and performing at major venues, one of its founding members was sitting in a cell. This created a kind of absence that shaped the group's dynamic in ways that don't get discussed enough. G-Unit released their first group album, Beg for Mercy, in November 2003. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. It went double platinum. For a debut from a rap crew, not a solo album, that was extraordinary. It meant that the 50 Cent phenomenon was not a solo act with backing dancers. It was a functioning group with multiple credible voices, and the audience was responding to all of them. G-Unit Records was established as a label imprint shortly after. 50 Cent was not just an artist now, he was a label executive. He had a roster. He had people to sign, develop, and promote. He was beginning to think like a businessman in a way that went beyond the usual rapper starts a label for his friends move. He was thinking about the infrastructure. He was thinking about what the platform could support. He was 27, 28 years old, and he was already operating at a level of business sophistication that most artists never reach at any age. G-Unit also had a clothing line. G-Unit Clothing launched in 2003 in partnership with Echo Unlimited, and by 2004, it was generating hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. Think about that for a second. Not just the music, not just the label, the clothing line was on its own a serious business. 50 Cent was building a consumer brand ecosystem at the same time he was at the top of the charts, years before this became the standard playbook for ambitious artists.
And the G-Unit brand was about more than just 50 Cent. That is the thing people miss when they reduce G-Unit to a backing crew. Lloyd Banks' debut album sold over 1 million copies. Young Buck's first solo album sold over 1 million copies. The brand had the ability to transfer commercial credibility across multiple artists, which is rare. Most artist-led labels are commercial black holes that drain the flagship act's resources while producing limited returns. G-Unit Records, at its peak, was generating real results on multiple fronts simultaneously. The business architecture of G-Unit at its height is worth studying independently of the music because it represents a model that very few artists of any era have managed to execute. Most artist-led businesses in the music industry are extensions of the artist's personal brand, which means they are only as durable as the artist's commercial relevance. When the artist fades, the businesses fade with them. 50 Cent structured G-Unit differently, with the clothing line, with the label imprint, with the talent development, in a way that created value that was not entirely contingent on his own continued commercial dominance. The business was designed to outlast the moment. Some of it did, some of it did not. But the design was right, even where the execution fell short. He was also developing a reputation in the industry that went beyond his commercial success. Executives who dealt with him in negotiations described someone who was unusually well prepared, who had read every document, who asked the right questions and pushed back on the right things. The street kid from Queens had taught himself the language of contracts and deal structures with the same intensity he had applied to learning song structure. He did not trust other people to manage his interests. He managed them himself, or he hired people he trusted under his close supervision. The control was total and deliberate. In 2003, a young rapper from Compton named Jayceon Taylor, The Game, came into the G-Unit orbit. He had been discovered by Dr. Dre, which gave him an immediate layer of credibility, and 50 Cent co-signed him publicly. The Game became an affiliate of G-Unit, which meant access to the biggest platform in hip-hop at that moment. His debut album, The Documentary, was released in January 2005, and it was genuinely great. Not just commercially successful, it was a critically acclaimed, ambitious, West Coast rap album that took the genre seriously as an art form. It debuted at #1 and sold over 5 million copies in the United States. By any measure, it was a massive success. But from the beginning, there were tensions. The Game had his own very strong sense of who he was. He was deeply connected to his Compton roots, deeply connected to his Bloods affiliation, and deeply connected to Dr. Dre as his primary mentor. The G-Unit structure, which operated with a hierarchy and a loyalty system that was extremely clear and extremely rigid, did not naturally accommodate an artist with those kinds of competing loyalties and that kind of independent identity.
50 Cent, for his part, had a very specific understanding of how G-Unit worked.
This is 50 Cent's insane physique at only 15 years old. Listen to the brutal regime he went through to attain it.
If you see that gate behind me, that's the gate to Spofford Juvenile Facility. The fitness there was more, you had to kind of keep yourself together, keep less altercations for you. It's a juvenile facility, but if they look at you like you might be a hard time, they might not want to have the altercation.
You won't believe the crazy diet plan 50 was following to achieve his chiseled body.
It was a cookout. I was eating like burgers and Franks. I didn't have like an extremely healthy regimen. This is the young girl part of my life.
You were in or you were out. Loyalty was not a value you negotiated on a case-by-case basis. It was a condition of membership. And from his perspective, there were signs that the Game's loyalty was divided between G-Unit and Dre, between New York and LA, between the crew and his own independent ambition. In February 2005, while Tony Yayo, who had recently been released, was making a public appearance at the Hot 97 radio station in New York City, a member of the Game's entourage was shot outside the building. G-Unit announced shortly after that the Game had been removed from the group. Let me just let that sequence of events sit there for a moment, because it is genuinely wild. A shooting outside a radio station, a firing announcement. This is a Tuesday in hip-hop in 2005. What followed was one of the longest, most elaborate, most personal beefs in hip-hop history. The Game and 50 Cent spent years, genuinely years, trading diss tracks, making public statements, escalating and occasionally de-escalating and then escalating again. The Game released Black Wall Street. He put out records going directly at 50 Cent's image and credibility. 50 Cent fired back with his own material and with relentless social media commentary in the years when that became the medium. The beef never fully ended. It went cold at various points. In 2023, there were even conversations about a potential collaboration, because this is hip-hop and nothing is ever truly over. But as of the time of this documentary, it remains one of the defining ongoing conflicts in 50 Cent's long and well-populated conflict catalog.
The Game was, by any fair assessment, a genuinely talented rapper who achieved enormous success on his own terms after leaving G-Unit. That is not in dispute. What is also not in dispute is that the parting was ugly and the aftermath was messy, and it cost both men something, creatively, commercially, reputationally, that a cleaner ending would not have cost. While the G Unit and Game situation was unfolding, 50 Cent released his second solo album. The Massacre came out in March 2005, and it was, commercially speaking, a monster. It sold over 1 million copies in its first 4 days. 4 days. It went on to sell about 13 million copies worldwide. By pure commercial metrics, it was another enormous success. Critically, it was more complicated. The consensus among critics was that it was a solid album that did not quite reach the heights of Get Rich or Die Trying. The urgency of the debut, the hunger, the rawness, the sense that this man had something to prove because his life literally depended on it, was harder to replicate now that he was one of the most commercially successful rappers on the planet. That is not a criticism unique to 50 Cent. It is one of the fundamental challenges of any artist who achieves massive success with their first work. How do you maintain the authenticity of hunger once you are no longer hungry? 50 Cent's answer, at the time, was to keep the aggression dialed up and the beefs running and the content as street level as possible. Whether that was artistically the right choice is a matter of taste. What is not a matter of taste is the sales numbers, which remained extraordinary.
G Unit was at its commercial peak in 2004 and 2005. They were selling records, they were filling venues, they were signing artists, they were moving units of G Unit branded clothing and merchandise. It was a genuine empire, not just a rap group with ambitions. And this is a good moment to zoom out and appreciate something about what 50 Cent was building, because I think people underestimate it by treating it as a music story. By 2005, G Unit was a multi-tentacled operation. You had the recording side, multiple artists, multiple albums, multiple revenue streams from music. You had the label imprint deal with Interscope, which gave them major label infrastructure while preserving a meaningful degree of independence. You had the clothing line doing enormous volume. You had touring, merchandise, licensing, and you had 50 Cent's own personal brand, which was one of the most commercially potent in the world at that moment. This is not standard for a rapper in his third year of mainstream success. This is what happens when someone applies a specific kind of intelligence to an opportunity, when they see not just the moment, but the architecture that can make the moment last. Most artists who hit that level of commercial success in their first 2 or 3 years burn through it. They spend it, or the label takes it, or the market moves, and they have nothing to fall back on. 50 Cent was already building the fallback while he was at the top. And this is where we get to something that I genuinely love about the 50 Cent story, because it is so completely unexpected and so completely at odds with the image he was selling at the time.
In 2004, around the same time The Massacre was being recorded and G Unit was at the height of his commercial power, 50 Cent made a business decision that had nothing to do with rap music. He took an equity stake in a small beverage company called Glisal. They made a product called vitamin water. You have definitely had one. The ones with the colors and the names like Defense and Focus and the various things that water is supposedly doing for you beyond just being water. Now, this was not an unusual concept at the time. Celebrity endorsement deals were standard practice. A rapper or an athlete would attach their name to a product, appear in ads, collect a check, move on. That is how it had always worked. The company gets the visibility boost, the celebrity gets the money, everyone goes home. 50 Cent did not take a traditional endorsement deal. He negotiated for equity in the company. He took a stake in Glisal instead of, or in addition to, an upfront fee, which meant he was not just a brand ambassador, he was an owner. He had a financial interest in the company's success that went beyond whatever he was paid to appear in the ads. In 2007, Coca-Cola acquired Glisal. The acquisition price was $4.1 billion. $4.1 billion for vitamin water, which is, and I say this with affection because I too have purchased many vitamin waters, a drink that is mostly just flavored sugar water with vitamins added to it. $4.1 billion. 50 Cent's stake in that deal is reported to have earned him approximately $100 million. $100 million from a beverage company at the age of 31.
Now, let me put that in context. In 2003, Get Rich or Die Trying sold more than 12 million copies in the United States alone. At a standard royalty rate, On a blockbuster album with that kind of label support, a rapper might realistically take home somewhere between $3 and $10 million in royalties after all the recoupments and deductions. Maybe more if the deal was particularly good. But the music, for all its commercial dominance, was not generating the kind of money that a 9-figure equity exit in a consumer brand generates. The vitamin water deal is the single most important financial event in 50 Cent's life, and it was not a music event, it was a business event. And it happened because he understood something that most artists at the peak of their commercial power never fully internalize. Your fame is a depreciating asset. Your music career will eventually slow down. But if you use the fame while you have it to build equity in real businesses, businesses that generate value independent of whether you are on the radio, you can create wealth that outlasts the career. He understood this at 30 years old in 2004, before most people in the music industry were talking about it in these terms. The equity mentality that the vitamin water deal represented was not something 50 Cent arrived at through business school or through a mentor who taught him the difference between endorsement fees and ownership stakes. He arrived at it through the same method he arrived at everything, by watching, calculating, and refusing to accept the first option he was offered. The standard celebrity deal at that time was a flat fee and a royalty arrangement. He saw that deal, understood what the upside ceiling was, and asked for something different. The ask itself was the intelligent move. The fact that Glasso said yes was luck combined with good timing. The fact that he asked was entirely him. It also set a precedent in the celebrity endorsement world that is still being felt. When the vitamin water exit became public knowledge, every manager and every athlete and every artist started asking the same question. Can we get equity instead of a fee? The answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no, usually involves significant negotiation. But 50 Cent made the question normal. He demonstrated with a $100 million outcome that the equity model was not just possible, but potentially transformative. The ripple effects of that deal on how celebrities negotiate brand partnerships have been enormous. And he made it happen because he was willing to ask for something the conventional deal structure did not offer. And that understanding is the key to everything that comes after in his business career. The TV production company, the liquor brands, the nightclub deals, all of it. It started here, with water, with flavored, lightly vitaminated water.
Okay, so while all of this business empire building was happening, 50 Cent was also maintaining what I can only describe as a truly ambitious conflict schedule. Because at the same time, he was negotiating equity deals and running a record label and being one of the best-selling artists on the planet, he was also beefing with approximately everyone. Let me walk you through the highlights, because the full list is genuinely impressive in its scope. Fat Joe, Joe Cartagena from the Bronx. The beef between 50 Cent and Fat Joe ran for years and was fueled by a combination of real disrespect, competitive ego, and the specific political dynamics of New York hip-hop in the early 2000s. There were diss tracks, there were public statements, there were moments where it looked like it might escalate beyond words. It became one of the longer-running feuds of the era without ever quite reaching a definitive conclusion. Jadakiss, Jason Phillips from Yonkers. Jadakiss is one of the most technically skilled rappers of his generation, and his conflict with 50 Cent was interesting because it was one of the few where the person on the other side was credibly competitive on purely lyrical terms. The exchanges between them produced some genuinely entertaining rap content, which is ultimately the test of whether a beef has value beyond the drama. Cameron Giles from Harlem. The Cameron situation is its own entire chapter in New York rap history. Cam had a talent for finding the specific thing that would annoy you most and then doing that thing relentlessly. His approach to the 50 Cent conflict was to not take it seriously in a way that 50 Cent found genuinely aggravating, which is its own form of warfare. And this is something that deserves a full moment, because Cameron's method of dealing with 50 Cent was genuinely novel, and if you appreciate this kind of thing, kind of brilliant. Most people who got into conflicts with 50 Cent responded with either matching aggression or obvious discomfort, both of which played into 50 Cent's hands, because aggression gave him something to respond to, and discomfort signaled weakness. Cameron chose a third option. He treated the whole thing like it was funny, like 50 Cent was a minor annoyance rather than a serious threat.
And because Cameron was legitimately funny and legitimately creative, he was able to pull that off in a way that genuinely landed. The result was one of the more entertaining chapters of early to mid-2000s hip-hop beef culture, and one of the few cases where the person on the other side of a 50 Cent conflict came out looking at least as good as 50 Cent did, which is not a common outcome. Ja Rule, of course, still running. We covered the origins of that one in part 1, and it continued through this period. By the mid-2000s, Murder Inc. was under serious legal pressure, facing federal investigation for alleged ties to drug trafficking. Whatever the outcome of those legal proceedings, and we are not a legal documentary, so we will not go deep on it here, the practical effect was that Ja Rule's commercial momentum was disrupted at exactly the moment when 50 Cent was at its peak. The timing was not fortunate for Ja Rule.
Now, here's something I want you to think about, because it reframes the beef catalog from entertainment to strategy. Every single one of these conflicts, regardless of how they started, had the effect of keeping 50 Cent in the news. In an era before social media gave every artist a direct channel to their audience, before Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, the primary way to stay in the conversation between album cycles was radio, press coverage, and beef. And 50 Cent understood this intuitively and used it accordingly. He was generating content before content was a business category. He was maintaining audience engagement between releases in a way that modern artists do with Instagram posts and podcast appearances. Except in 2004 and 2005, the medium was diss tracks and radio interviews and public statements that gossip blogs would pick up and distribute. He was operating the media environment like an instrument, and he was very, very good at it. In 2005, 50 Cent did something that most people in his position don't attempt. He starred in a movie. Get Rich or Die Trying, the film, directed by Jim Sheridan, was a semi-autobiographical story loosely based on his life. He played a character named Marcus, a drug dealer who pursues a rap career, which is about as close to autobiography as fiction gets. The film was a commercial disappointment by the standards of what was expected given his musical success, and critics were mixed. Some felt the story was too familiar, too much a collection of genre conventions strung together. Others found it genuinely effective as a character study, particularly in the scenes that drew most directly from 50 Cent's actual experience.
But here is the thing about the Get Rich or Die Trying film that matters in the context of the larger 50 Cent story. It was the beginning, not a detour from the main career, not a vanity project, the beginning of a relationship with film and television production that would, within a decade, become the most economically significant part of his professional life. He was already thinking about the screen. He was already thinking about storytelling beyond music. The film was learning the language. He would become fluent in that language, extremely fluent. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. In 2005, he was still primarily a rapper who had acted in a movie. What the film production taught him, beyond the basics of storytelling on screen, was something about the business of film and television that proved to be extremely valuable. He saw how the money worked. He saw how decisions got made. He saw the gap between what the creative people wanted and what the money people were willing to approve, and he watched how that negotiation played out. He was not yet in a position to control that negotiation, but he was studying it, filing it away, understanding that the people with the money made the real decisions, and that the only way to have genuine creative control was to also have financial control. That lesson, absorbed on the set of a movie that didn't quite work commercially, would shape how he structured every television deal he made for the following decade. The transformation into a television mogul was still years away, but while the external conflict catalog was generating attention and keeping 50 Cent in the conversation, the internal dynamics of G-Unit were getting more complicated. The structure that had worked perfectly when everyone was hungry and coming up together began to show strain as individual careers developed at different rates, and individual egos began to chafe against the hierarchy. Lloyd Banks released his debut solo album, The Hunger for More, in 2004, and it sold well, debuting at #1. Young Buck released Straight Outta Cashville in 2004 and had commercial success of his own, but the fundamental structure remained. 50 Cent was the center of gravity, and everything orbited around him. That works beautifully when you are all on the way up. It becomes more complicated when people start to develop their own audiences and their own ambitions and their own sense of what they deserve. The Young Buck situation, which we will cover in more detail in Part 3, was particularly painful. Buck was a day one,
someone who had been in G Unit before the commercial success, who had earned his place, who had contributed genuinely to the group's success. The way his relationship with 50 Cent ended was ugly enough that it left a mark on how both men are perceived, even now. But we are not there yet. In 2005-2006, the empire was still running. The music was still selling. The conflicts were still generating attention. And 50 Cent was still, by any reasonable measure, one of the 2 or 3 most commercially powerful figures in hip-hop. By 2006 and into 2007, something was happening in hip-hop that 50 Cent could not have fully controlled or predicted. The sound was changing. The values were shifting. A new generation of artists was emerging who were bringing something different to the genre. Something more emotional, more introspective, more willing to be vulnerable in ways that the hardcore street rap aesthetic 50 Cent had built his brand around explicitly rejected.
Lil Wayne was having one of the most prolific and critically celebrated runs of any rapper in history, releasing the Dedication mixtape series and building toward what would become the Carter 3 in 2008. His approach to rap, playful, surreal, emotionally unguarded, technically brilliant, was genuinely unlike what had come before. And then there was Kanye West. Kanye West is a complicated figure in every possible sense, and we are not making a documentary about him, so I will keep this focused. What matters for the 50 Cent story is what Kanye represented in 2007, specifically, an artist who had made vulnerability, sensitivity, and emotional openness not just acceptable in hip-hop, but celebrated.
Right now, if you punch me in my mouth, I'm up. I'm up. I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm all the way. Let me tell you, and guess what's gonna happen?
No, because it ain't gonna matter. And I'm gonna take the same kind of money that you would get and give it to the homie. And go together double time. Because they finally get a chance to run. Then it start feeling fun. All of a sudden, everybody don't remember nothing. Look, actually, do I want a problem? I don't ever want a problem. But when they say they want a problem, I say no problem.
Who had taken the whole thesis of what a rapper was supposed to be and turned it sideways, who had built an audience of enormous size and genuine devotion around an identity that was almost precisely the opposite of the hard, street-certified image that had been dominant in commercial rap. 50 Cent watched all of this happening and, to his credit, did not pretend it wasn't happening. He saw the shift. He did not fully embrace it. That would have been inauthentic and everyone would have known it. But he was aware of it. And then, in 2007, he did something that in retrospect looks like either an act of extreme confidence or a significant miscalculation, depending on how you feel about the outcome. In September 2007, 50 Cent released his 3rd solo album, Curtis, and Kanye West released his 3rd solo album, Graduation, on the same day. This was not an accident. 50 Cent publicly declared it a competition. He said in various interviews and public statements that if Kanye West outsold him in the first week, he would retire from rap. He was putting his legacy, or at least a version of it, on the table as a bet.
At the time, this felt like the kind of thing 50 Cent always did. Bold, aggressive, designed to generate attention, and it worked as a PR strategy. The story of the 2 albums releasing on the same date with 50 Cent's retirement on the line was everywhere. It was a cultural event in itself before either album had sold a single copy. And then the numbers came in. Graduation sold approximately 957,000 copies in its first week. Curtis sold approximately 691,000 copies in its first week. Kanye won by a significant margin. Now, 691,000 copies in a week is by any normal standard an enormous number. In any other context, in any other week, that would have been a dominant first week performance. But 50 Cent had put the narrative of the contest front and center, and the narrative said that he had lost. And narratives, once they exist, are very difficult to undo. 50 Cent did not retire. He never actually intended to, I think. The retirement threat was more rhetorical than literal. But the sales figures became a symbol of something larger. They became the moment when the data confirmed what the culture had been feeling. The era of hard-edged street rap's total commercial dominance was ending. Kanye's emotional, maximalist, genre-bending approach had found an audience that was bigger than 50 Cent's audience in that specific moment. And that was information. The critical reception of Curtis was also more tepid than either of his previous albums. Critics found it formulaic in places and felt that 50 Cent had not evolved as an artist in the way that the changed landscape required. Whether you agree with that assessment or not, the combination of the sales loss and the critical response created a perception, a narrative, that his moment had peaked.
Now, I want to be very precise here, because this is the kind of moment that gets oversimplified when people tell the 50 Cent story. The Curtis versus Graduation moment is not the end of 50 Cent's career. It is not even close to the end of his story. It is a data point. It is the closing of one chapter and the beginning of a period of recalibration. What comes after, the television empire, the business moves, the way he rebuilt his position in the culture, is in many ways more impressive than the 2003 commercial peak. Because making it is one thing. Surviving the transition to what comes after making it is a completely different skill set. And Curtis Jackson, as we have established over the course of 2 hours of documentary, has a very specific relationship with situations that other people would describe as the end. They have never been the end for him yet. There's one more thing worth saying about the Curtis versus Graduation moment, which is that it was also a signal about how the media environment was changing. In 2003, 50 Cent's approach to PR, aggressive, confrontational, always in motion, was perfectly calibrated for the media landscape of that moment. But by 2007, the internet was becoming the primary arena for cultural conversation. Blog culture was exploding. Gossip sites were becoming major traffic drivers. The kind of slow burn, sustained campaign that 50 Cent ran through mixtapes and radio relationships was being disrupted by something faster, more chaotic, more democratic.
Kanye West, for all his well-documented personal eccentricities, was extraordinarily intuitive about that new landscape. He understood how to make himself a topic of conversation in ways that generated attention and kept people engaged between projects. He was learning the grammar of internet culture before most people in the industry had even noticed internet culture existed as a distinct thing to learn. 50 Cent would eventually adapt to social media and adapt brilliantly. His Instagram presence in the 2010s became genuinely one of the funniest and most chaotically entertaining accounts on the platform. But in 2007, he was still operating on the old playbook, and Kanye was writing a new one. The sales numbers reflected that gap. I want to take a moment here, because we've been talking about commercial success and beefs and business moves for a while now, and the risk in telling this story is that you start to see 50 Cent as a brand rather than a person. So let's talk briefly about some of the private dimensions of this era. 50 Cent has 2 sons. His first son, Marquise Jackson, was born in 1997 when Curtis was 21 years old, to a woman named Shaniqua Tompkins. His second son, Sire Jackson, was born in 2012 to model and entrepreneur Daphne Joy. The relationship between 50 Cent and Sire is, by all visible evidence, a fundamentally different one from the relationship with Marquise. He has posted about Sire with genuine warmth and visible pride across multiple platforms. He brought him to events. He talked about watching him grow. Whatever the specific dynamics of his personal life that we cannot see from the outside, the public dimension of his relationship with his younger son has always looked like someone who found in fatherhood, the second time around, something that the first time did not quite go right. That contrast is not a comfortable one to sit with, but it is honest to note it. The question of fatherhood and what it means in the context of Curtis Jackson's life is one that the Hulu documentary is going to have to grapple with, if it is being honest. You cannot tell the full story of this man without talking about Marquise. You cannot talk about Marquise without acknowledging that the public handling of that estrangement was a failure, regardless of what happened privately between them. And you cannot talk about that failure without it complicating the triumph narrative. That complication is what makes the story real rather than promotional. Whether the documentary, which he is executive producing himself, will have the courage to go there is something only the finished product will answer. The relationship between 50 Cent and Marquise Jackson became one of the more painful public subplots of his later career. A father-son estrangement played out in social media posts and public statements that made a lot of people uncomfortable. We'll cover that in more detail in Part 3 and Part 4 when it becomes more prominent. For now, just know that fatherhood is part of this story in a way that is complicated and unresolved and very human. As for romantic relationships, 50 Cent has been consistently private about his personal life in ways that contrast sharply with his public persona. He's never married. He said publicly that he made a deliberate choice not to get married, which he has framed in terms of protecting his financial and personal freedom. Whether that framing is the complete picture is impossible to know from the outside. What is consistent is that he has kept this part of his life significantly more guarded than everything else. There is something interesting in that. For a man who turned every other aspect of his life into content, the deliberate privacy around his relationships suggests an understanding that there are things worth protecting from the public eye, even for someone whose entire career has been built on radical transparency about almost everything else. What we can say with confidence is that 50 Cent, throughout the peak years of his commercial success, was not living the life of someone who had forgotten where he came from. He maintained connections to South Jamaica even as the money changed everything around him. He continued to operate with the assumption that the world could turn on you at any moment, because he had seen it do exactly that multiple times. That vigilance, that fundamental refusal to fully relax, is both what drove his ambition and what made the personal relationships in his life complicated. The complexity of those relationships, with his sons especially, is something we will return to in Part 3 and Part 4. There is one relationship from this era that rarely gets the attention it deserves, which is his friendship with Eminem. The two men had a genuine friendship that went beyond the professional cosign. They toured together, appeared on each other's records, defended each other publicly when it mattered. What is interesting is how different they are as people. Eminem, emotionally volatile and confessional, willing to expose every wound in his music. 50 Cent, controlled and strategic, unwilling to show what he does not choose to show. They seem on paper like an odd pairing, and yet the friendship held across decades, across massive career changes for both, across the kinds of industry pressures that routinely destroy professional relationships. There is something in that durability that tells you something about both of them. For now, it is enough to say that the man who was dominating the charts and building a business empire in 2003, 2004, 2005 was also, privately, navigating the kinds of human complications that no amount of commercial success makes simple. He was still figuring out how to be a father, still trying to understand what his mother's death at 8 years old had done to his ability to trust people, still carrying all of it, even when the cameras were on and the sales numbers were coming in and everything looked from the outside like it was going exactly right. So let's take a breath and look at where things stand at the end of 2007. 2 solo albums totaling over 25 million copies sold worldwide, a group album that went double platinum, a clothing line generating hundreds of millions in revenue, approximately $100 million from Vitamin Water, and G-Unit Records as a functioning label with real commercial results across multiple artists. By every external measure, this is an unqualified success story, and it is. We should not minimize what he built in those 4 years, because it was genuinely extraordinary. But the Curtis versus Graduation moment did something that numbers alone don't capture. It changed the narrative. And in the entertainment industry, narrative is not separate from reality. It shapes it. Once the story became 50 Cent Lost, once that framing existed in the culture, it started affecting how labels thought about him, how press covered him, how younger artists positioned themselves relative to him. It was like a weather change. The temperature dropped a few degrees, and the whole ecosystem noticed. What Curtis Jackson does next, starting in 2008, is the part of this story that tells you who he actually is. Not the kid who survived the shooting, not the rapper who went platinum, the businessman, the television producer, the man who watched the ground shift under his feet, and instead of trying to dig back into the same ground, went and found a completely different piece of land to build on. The beefs are about to get more personal. G-Unit is about to fracture in ways that hurt. There is a bankruptcy filing in 2015 that generated the worst press of his career. And there is a television show called Power that is going to change everything again and prove that 50 Cent had a second act in him that was every bit as dominant as the first one, just in a completely different arena. All of that is coming right now. It is 2008. The commercial peak of the rap career is behind him. The Vitamin Water money is in the bank. And Curtis Jackson, 50 Cent, is standing at one of those crossroads that eventually finds every artist who reaches a certain level of success. The question is simple to state and brutally hard to answer. What do you do when the thing that made you famous stops working the way it used to? Most people in that position make one of two mistakes. The first mistake is chasing the old success, making the same record over and over, hoping the audience comes back, refusing to accept that the moment has passed. The second mistake is overcorrecting, completely reinventing yourself in a way that alienates the core audience you still have without actually building a new one. Curtis Jackson, to his credit, did neither of those things. He did something messier and more interesting. He stumbled through this period, and I say that not as a criticism, but as an observation, because watching someone who is genuinely brilliant navigate a genuinely difficult transition is more instructive than watching someone execute a plan perfectly. The stumbles are where you learn the most. Let's start with the beefs, because in 2008 and 2009, the conflicts in 50 Cent's world stopped being primarily about industry positioning and started being about something that felt a lot more personal. Before we get to the really painful stuff, let's acknowledge the Lil Wayne conflict, because it is a useful illustration of what 50 Cent was dealing with culturally at this moment and how he was responding to it.
Lil Wayne, from 2007 through 2009, was on one of the most remarkable runs in the history of hip-hop. He was releasing music at a volume and quality that was genuinely unprecedented. The Dedication mixtape series, The Drought 3, then The Carter 3 in 2008, which sold over 1 million copies in his first week and became one of the defining albums of that entire decade. He was also doing something that 50 Cent could not easily counter. He was being genuinely creative, sonically adventurous, unpredictable in a way that made each new release feel like an event. 50 Cent went after him. Of course he did. He released diss tracks, he made public statements, he challenged Wayne's commercial dominance in the way he had always challenged competition, directly, loudly, without any particular concern for how it looked. The problem was that the public was not particularly interested in siding with 50 Cent on this one. Wayne was too hot, too creative, too genuinely beloved by a fan base that had decided he was the best rapper alive and was not interested in being told otherwise. The conflict did not generate the kind of momentum that the earlier beefs had generated. It generated more of a collective shrug, which is the one response that 50 Cent has never had a good counter to. He moved on, quickly and without making too much of it, which was itself a sign of how the landscape had changed. In 2003 and 2004, 50 Cent did not move on from conflicts. He escalated until there was a clear winner. The fact that the Wayne situation got quietly shelved told you something about how his read of the room had recalibrated. Young Buck, David Darnell Brown, Nashville, Tennessee, one of the founding members of G-Unit, one of the people who had been there from before the success, one of the people whose loyalty was supposed to be beyond question.
The falling out between 50 Cent and Young Buck is one of the most painful and genuinely uncomfortable episodes in this entire story. Not because of the beef itself. Beef in hip-hop, as we have established, is practically a business strategy at this point, but because of how it ended and what it revealed about how 50 Cent operates when the loyalty he has built his entire value system around feels violated. The tensions had been building for a while. Young Buck had money problems, serious ones. He owed the IRS a substantial amount and was dealing with financial pressure that was not being resolved. There were also creative tensions and questions about his commitment to G-Unit's direction during a period when 50 Cent was navigating the post-Kanye commercial environment and needed everyone in the crew locked in. In 2008, Young Buck was officially removed from G-Unit. That itself was not unusual. 50 Cent had shown before, with the game, that he was willing to cut people from the roster when he felt the relationship had broken down. What made the Buck situation different was what came next. 50 Cent released a phone call, a private phone call in which Young Buck was crying, genuinely, audibly breaking down emotionally while talking about his situation and his relationship with 50 Cent. He released it on the internet for the public to hear. I want to be honest with you about this because we are doing a documentary about 50 Cent and we are doing it with a genuine attempt to be fair, which means we can't skip over the moments where his behavior is difficult to defend. Releasing that phone call was cruel. There is no other word for it. Whatever had happened between them, whatever Buck had done or not done, a private moment of emotional vulnerability is not a weapon. Using it as one says something about the person doing the using that is not flattering. The hip-hop community, which had largely tolerated and even celebrated 50 Cent's various conflicts over the years, reacted to the Young Buck phone call with a discomfort that was noticeable. It crossed the line.
Did he do it, right? Yeah. I know you've been heavy on social media talking about it. He did it. And I'm the only one who's been vocal about this long before it actually. But I also didn't participate. I also didn't go to those parties. Yeah. So a lot of the celebrity culture that you don't hear saying anything is because they participated.
Was there a reason you never went to those parties back in the day?
I'm just not with all that flippy shit. Like all of the stuff that he's doing, I'm not into that type of stuff. I'm just a little more, maybe you could say basic or normal.
Not a legal line, not a commercial line, a human one. And 50 Cent, who had always been extraordinarily skilled at reading where the line was and staying just on the acceptable side of it, misjudged this one. Young Buck continued to make music after leaving G-Unit. He has had his own separate career, his own separate conflicts, his own separate life. The two men have not reconciled in any meaningful public way. The phone call is still out there if you want to find it, which I do not recommend unless you are in a particularly emotionally robust place. It is uncomfortable to listen to. It was supposed to be. At the same time that the Young Buck situation was unfolding, 50 Cent had opened a new front in his conflict catalog. And this one was different from the previous beefs in a way that was genuinely interesting. Rick Ross, William Leonard Roberts II, had emerged in 2006 with a debut album called Port of Miami and an image that was wall-to-wall drug boss mythology. He rapped about moving kilos, about commanding criminal organizations, about the specific textures of a life lived at the top of the drug trade. He was good at it. His voice was enormous, his production choices were excellent, and his persona was compelling. He was building a real career. The problem, and 50 Cent discovered this and characteristically immediately turned it into a campaign, was that Rick Ross, prior to his rap career, had worked as a correctional officer, a prison guard, for the Florida Department of Corrections from 1995 to 1997.
Now, in the context of regular life, working as a corrections officer is a perfectly normal job. It is difficult work, it is necessary work, there is no shame in it. But in the context of building a rap persona entirely around drug kingpin mythology, having worked as a prison guard is what you might call a credibility complication. 50 Cent did not simply mention this and move on. That is not how he operates. He gathered documentation, actual photographs, employment records, evidence, and began a systematic campaign to make the information impossible to ignore. He put it on the internet, he talked about it in interviews, he made diss tracks referencing it. He kept it going long after most people thought it had run its course. The campaign was effective in the specific sense that it created a narrative that Ross had to spend significant energy responding to. It is genuinely hard to maintain a drug boss image when there are photographs of you in a corrections officer uniform circulating widely on the early internet. Ross did respond. He addressed it, dismissed it, eventually largely moved past it. But it cost him something during a period when he was still establishing himself. Here is where it gets complicated though, and I think this part of the story deserves honest examination. The Rick Ross campaign also revealed something about 50 Cent's approach to conflict that was starting to concern some observers. The thoroughness of it, the relentlessness, the fact that he was spending extraordinary amounts of time and energy on someone who, by any objective measure, was not as commercially significant as he was at that point. There was a quality to it that felt less like competitive positioning and more like something personal, like the need to win was not just about winning, but about something deeper. The Ross conflict also had a dimension that would eventually blow back on 50 Cent in a significant and very expensive way. Ross had a child with a woman named Lastonia Leviston, and a sex tape involving Leviston existed. 50 Cent obtained and distributed that tape as part of the ongoing conflict with Ross. Years later, Leviston sued him for this. The jury sided with her and awarded her $5 million in damages. That legal judgment was one of the primary triggers for the bankruptcy filing in 2015. We will come back to that. The short version of the Rick Ross situation, 50 Cent won the early rounds on points, as he almost always does. But the final score, when the legal consequences arrived years later, was more complicated. There is a lesson buried in the Rick Ross episode that is easy to miss because the whole thing is so entertaining to observe from the outside.
50 Cent's instinct for finding the weak point in an opponent's armor and pressing on it until something breaks is genuinely remarkable. He identified exactly the right vulnerability in Ross's image and exploited it with a precision that was, if you can separate the ethics from the strategy, kind of masterful. But the escalation into obtaining and distributing private material involving an uninvolved third party crossed into territory that had real human costs. For Leviston, who had no part in the conflict between the two rappers and paid a significant price for it, and ultimately legal costs for 50 Cent himself. Conflicts in 50 Cent's world have a tendency to keep generating consequences long after the initial beef has cooled. The Leviston judgment, 5 years after the Ross beef was at its peak, is one example. The Young Buck phone call, which is still discussed whenever either man's name comes up, is another. The actions take a moment. The aftermath takes much longer.
The Rick Ross conflict also had an unexpected long-term outcome worth noting. Rick Ross survived it and went on to become one of the most commercially successful rappers of the following decade. Maybach Music Group, the label Ross founded, became a genuine powerhouse. He built an actual business empire around the Wingstop franchise chain, which is either ironic or instructive, depending on how you look at it. The man 50 Cent tried to destroy by exposing his non-street origins became one of the more durable business builders in the industry. Audiences, it turns out, are more forgiving of authenticity gaps than conventional hip-hop wisdom suggests, at least when the music is good enough. Ross's music was good enough, and eventually the correctional officer controversy became a chapter in his story, rather than the final word of it, just as the shooting and the blacklisting became chapters in 50 Cent's story, rather than final words. In November 2009, 50 Cent released his 4th studio album, Before I Self-Destruct. And I want to be fair to this record, because it tends to get written off as a commercial failure and left there, and the story is more interesting than that. Before I Self-Destruct was, in concept, ambitious. It was paired with a companion film, a short movie also called Before I Self-Destruct, which 50 Cent wrote, produced, and starred in, about a young man growing up in the streets who watches his mother get killed and turns to crime. If that sounds familiar, it should. It is obviously autobiographical. It is his most direct artistic engagement with the story of his own childhood, put on screen rather than in verse. The album sold approximately 160,000 copies in its first week. To put that number in context, Get Rich or Die Trying sold 872,000 in its first week. 6 years after that debut, the audience had contracted to about 18% of what it had been. Now, 160,000 first week is still a respectable number by the standards of 2009, when the overall music industry was in freefall because of the internet and the collapse of CD sales. But by the standards of 50 Cent specifically, by the expectations that his early success had created, it felt like a very public contraction. The critical reception was mixed. Some critics appreciated the conceptual ambition and found genuine moments of artistic honesty in the record. Others felt it was a confused attempt to do too many things at once. The street rap that was his comfort zone, the more experimental material he was clearly trying to push into, and the autobiographical film concept all sitting uncomfortably alongside each other.
2011 was unrecognizable compared to the one he had dominated in 2003. The change was not just stylistic, though it was certainly stylistic. It was structural. The internet had dismantled the old distribution model that had made the first week's sales figure the definitive measure of an artist's commercial relevance. Streaming was beginning. Mixtapes, which 50 Cent had essentially pioneered as a commercial strategy, had been democratized to the point where every artist was releasing them constantly, which made the format much less distinctive. And the artists who were dominating were operating in a completely different register from where 50 Cent had built his career. Drake was rising, an artist who led with emotional vulnerability, who made introspection the central aesthetic of his music, who was from Toronto rather than any American city that had previously produced commercial rap stars. Lil Wayne was in his most creatively prolific period. Kanye was making 808 and Heartbreak, an album that had almost no rap on it and was built around auto-tune singing over electronic production, and critics were treating it as a masterpiece. The space for the kind of hard, unironic, street-certified rap that 50 Cent represented was not gone. It has never been gone, and it never will be, because there is always an audience for that. But it was no longer the center of gravity. The center had moved, and 50 Cent, who had always been at the center,
was having to figure out what his relationship to the margins of his own genre looked like. He put out music, consistently in fact. 50 Cent never stopped making music during this period, which sometimes gets lost in a narrative of decline. He released mixtapes that were genuinely well received in a context where they were heard. He dropped individual tracks and collaborations. He was not absent, he was working. But the commercial results were not what they had been, and in an industry that measures everything in numbers, the numbers were telling a story he could not fully control. There is something quietly admirable about this that I think is worth acknowledging, even as we note the commercial struggles. A lot of artists who experienced the kind of commercial contraction that 50 Cent went through in this period simply stop making music. They do the math. The resources required to make and promote a record are enormous. The commercial returns are no longer what they were, the critical reception is lukewarm at best, and they conclude that the effort is not justified. They go into semi-retirement and make occasional appearances and live off catalog royalties and legacy status. 50 Cent did not do that. He kept making music because making music is part of who he is at a fundamental level, separate from the commercial logic around it. It is what he started doing before anyone was paying him to do it, back when he was handing CDs to strangers in barbershops. The music was never only about the money. The money was the measure of success, not the reason for the work. And once you understand that distinction, the fact that he kept putting out music even when the commercial returns were diminishing makes complete sense. He also, during this period, started becoming genuinely funny on the internet. This sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. 50 Cent, in the early days of Instagram and Twitter, discovered that he had a talent for social media trolling that was, at its best, genuinely hilarious. He would post about celebrities, about his conflicts, about his business ventures, with a combination of self-awareness and shamelessness that was completely distinctive. His account became must-follow material for people who had no particular interest in his music but found the persona irresistible. It kept him culturally relevant in a period when the music alone might not have. The specific humor of 50 Cent's social media presence deserves actual examination because it was not random. It was very specific. He targeted people who were either vulnerable to a particular kind of exposure or who had said something that created an opening. He used captions that were plausibly deniable as jokes, but landed as clear and pointed. He had an instinct for the image that would be most embarrassing when placed next to a particular caption. And he never, in any of this, seemed to be trying. The whole thing had the ease of someone who does not have to work hard to be funny, which made it significantly funnier.
The social media persona also did something that his earlier work had sometimes struggled to do, which is reveal the self-awareness underneath the hard exterior. The willingness to post things that made fun of himself, the occasional wink at his own reputation for relentlessness, the comedic acknowledgement that maybe he had a lot of ongoing beefs at any given time. All of it suggested a man who knew exactly what his public image was and was comfortable enough with it to play with it. That level of self-awareness is rare in public figures of any kind, and especially rare in artists whose career is built on a specific hardness of persona. It made him more interesting, not less. It kept him culturally relevant in a period when the music alone might not have. Around this period, 2011, 2012, into 2013, something was happening in 50 Cent's personal life that was becoming increasingly impossible to ignore because he was making it impossible to ignore. His relationship with his eldest son, Marquise Jackson, was deteriorating publicly. Marquise was born in 1997. He grew up in a world where his father was one of the most famous people on earth, where the name 50 Cent was everywhere, and where the actual relationship between father and son was, by both of their accounts, though they tell the story very differently, strained and often painful. The complications between 50 Cent and Marquise's mother, Shaniqua Tompkins, added layers to an already difficult co-parenting situation. What made it unusual and what made it genuinely uncomfortable to watch is that 50 Cent chose to engage with the conflict publicly. He made comments about Marquise on social media. He made statements in interviews. Marquise responded publicly. The estrangement between a father and a son, which in almost any other family would be a private wound, became a running subplot in the 50 Cent public narrative. The instinct to go public with personal conflicts, which had served 50 Cent brilliantly in his professional life, had generated attention and momentum and narrative control in situations where privacy would have left him powerless.
did not serve him well here. A dispute with a rap competitor is different from a dispute with your child. The audience that had cheered on the Rick Ross campaign and found the Ja Rule beef entertaining was noticeably less comfortable cheering on a public feud between a father and his teenage son. This is one of those places in the story where I think it is worth being direct. This was a failure of judgment. Not a business failure, not a strategic miscalculation in the entertainment sense, a human one. A father choosing to conduct a family conflict in public in a way that necessarily put a child in an impossible position. Whatever the merits of 50 Cent's position in the dispute, the venue was wrong. As of the time this documentary was made, the relationship between Curtis Jackson and Marquise has not been publicly repaired. Marquise has spoken about the estrangement in interviews of his own. They remain, as far as anyone on the outside can tell, estranged. That is a real cost, not a commercial cost, not a reputational cost, or not primarily, a human cost. The kind that does not show up in first-week sales figures. In June 2014, he released Animal Ambition, his 5th studio album. And Animal Ambition is interesting because it is not a great album. Most critics and fans would agree on that, but it is a revealing one.
The title says it, Animal Ambition, brute, relentless, unkillable drive. The album is essentially a thesis statement about who Curtis Jackson is at the level of character, not at the level of a particular style or a particular moment in culture, but as a fundamental property of the man. He is someone who does not stop, who does not accept that the run is over, who will keep making albums and keep releasing music and keep showing up even when the numbers are down and the cultural conversation has moved on. It debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200, not number 1, not the dominant commercial event of his earlier albums, but 5 on an album that most of the industry had not been waiting for is not nothing. He still had an audience. It was smaller, it was loyal, and he was going to keep making music for them regardless of what anyone else thought about it. But here is the thing about 2014 that makes Animal Ambition something of a footnote in his own story that year. While he was releasing that album, something else was already in motion, something that was going to reshape his career and his public identity more dramatically than any album could have. A television show called Power was about to premiere on Starz. Before we get to Power though, one more thing about 2014, because it actually matters for understanding the emotional landscape 50 Cent was navigating at this point. Also in 2014, G-Unit reunited. The original lineup, 50 Cent, Lloyd Banks, Tony Yayo, Young Buck, got back together and released a collaborative project called The Beauty of Independence. It was not a massive commercial event, but it was a statement, and the statement was worth something.
Reuniting with Young Buck was significant. After the phone call, after everything that had happened publicly between them, the reunion said something about 50 Cent that I think deserves credit. He was capable of setting aside a conflict, however ugly it had gotten, when the relationship was important enough to warrant it. The G-Unit family meant something to him. It always had. It was built in the years before the money, back when loyalty was the only currency that mattered because there was nothing else. The reunion tour was moderately successful. The music was received warmly by fans who had grown up with G-Unit and wanted to relive that era. And it reminded everyone, including perhaps 50 Cent himself, that the foundation he had built in those early years was more durable than the commercial fluctuations of the decade following it. But the real story of 2014 was not the music. The real story of 2014 was power. But one thing the G-Unit reunion demonstrated, beyond the personal reconciliation, was that the audience for that era of hip-hop had not gone anywhere. The people who had been teenagers when Beg for Mercy dropped in 2003 were now adults in their late 20s and early 30s, with money and genuine nostalgia for that specific sound. They were willing to show up and pay for it. The market for 50 Cent was not dead. It had matured. It had gone from radio dominance to the kind of sustained, loyal audience that keeps legacy artists viable for decades. And 50 Cent was discovering that having a catalog instead of a current moment was, in its own way, extremely valuable. One thing the G-Unit reunion showed, beyond the emotional reconciliation, was that the audience for that era of hip-hop had not gone anywhere. The tour drew well.
The shows were energetic.
He would do a lot of foul shit. Like behind the scenes, he would do some foul shit, like hating on, like doing things with people I'd done business with that he'd say shit that I was like, he said that to you?
Right.
Like, yeah, so all right. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, and niggas don't know what they like till they see somebody with it. So they want the girls after you're done with them.
Leftovers.
Yeah.
Take your leftovers. A lot of niggas have more leftovers.
The people who had been teenagers when Beg for Mercy dropped in 2003 were now adults in their late 20s and early 30s, with disposable income and a genuine nostalgia for that specific sound and that specific era. They were willing to show up. The market for 50 Cent in G-Unit was not dead. It just matured. It had gone from radio dominance to the kind of sustained, loyal, long-tail audience that keeps legacy artists viable for decades. And 50 Cent, who had once been the center of the cultural conversation, was discovering what it meant to have a catalog instead of a current moment, and finding that the catalog was, in its own way, extremely valuable. One more business note before we get there, because it is easy to focus so heavily on the music and the television that you miss the quieter moves happening underneath. Around this period, 50 Cent began building what would become Sire Spirits, his premium liquor brand, eventually encompassing a cognac called Branson Cognac and a champagne called Le Chemin du Roi. These are not novelty celebrity beverages slapped together for a quick licensing check. They are genuine premium spirits products with real distribution deals and real market presence. The vitamin water playbook was being applied again. Find a consumer category where your brand has relevance. Invest in real product quality. Build it as a business rather than a marketing stunt, and hold equity rather than collecting a flat fee. He had done it with water. He was doing it with liquor. He was building a portfolio of consumer brand equity that existed completely independently of whether he released another album or not.
By 2014, 50 Cent had income streams from music royalties, from his Stars deal, from G-Unit Film and Television's production fees, from Sire Spirits, and from various other endorsements and investments. He was not dependent on any single revenue source. And in an industry where careers are fragile and commercial success is unpredictable, having that kind of diversification was not just smart. It was what separated the people who built lasting wealth from the people who had money for a decade and then didn't. Power premiered on the Stars Network on June 7, 2014. And if you have not seen it, what are you doing with your Sundays? It is a crime drama set in New York City about a man named James St. Patrick, also known as Ghost, who runs one of the most successful nightclubs in the city while simultaneously being one of the biggest drug dealers in New York. He wants to go legitimate. Everything in his life makes that extremely difficult. The show was created by Courtney Kemp, who had written for The Good Wife and who had a very specific vision for what power could be. Prestige television that took the world of crime drama seriously as an art form, with a primarily black cast, with production values that matched anything on premium cable, and with a story complex enough to sustain multiple seasons of genuine dramatic investment. 50 Cent executive produced it, and he appeared in it as a character named Kanan, a cold, calculating, deeply dangerous figure from Ghost's past who becomes one of the central antagonists of the series. Kanan was not a cameo, not a bit part for the famous person who was attached to the project. He was a fully realized character with his own arc, his own motivations, his own relationship to the central narrative of the show. And 50 Cent was genuinely good in the role in a way that surprised people who had written him off as a rapper trying to act.
There is something almost perfectly poetic about the character of Kanan. By the way, when you think about who was playing him, Kanan is a man who was dangerous and feared, who went away for a period and who came back to find that the world had moved on without him, and who responds to that reality not with acceptance, but with absolute, relentless, methodical force. He is going to take back what he feels is his. He does not care what it costs. He does not care who gets in the way. Sound like anyone we know? The casting of 50 Cent as Kanan was not accidental and not just a promotional decision. Courtney Kemp has been clear in interviews that she wanted someone who brought genuine menace, the kind that you cannot manufacture in a workshop, that comes from an actual life of actual consequences. And 50 Cent, whatever his qualities and flaws as a human being, has that. You watch him as Kanan, and there is a stillness to him that is more unsettling than any amount of shouting or violence. He is a man who has decided, who has already done the calculation and knows what he is going to do. The performance works because it is drawing on something real.
There was also, around the production of Power, the beginning of what would become 50 Cent's full transformation into a serious television executive. He was not just showing up for his scenes and collecting a check. He was in the writer's room. He was on set. He had opinions about casting, about story direction, about the visual language of the show. He was learning television production from the inside, the same way he had learned the music industry, by being present, by asking questions, by watching how decisions got made and why.
Some of those learning experiences created friction. There were reported tensions on the Power set between 50 Cent and other cast members, between his vision for certain story directions and what the writers wanted to do, between the demands of being both a performer in and a producer of the same show. What those who worked on Power consistently say, even accounting for the tensions, is that 50 Cent was genuinely knowledgeable. He was not the executive producer who shows up for the premiere and disappears between seasons. He was in the conversations that mattered. He understood the financial structure of the show, the subscriber economics of the Stars model, the marketing decisions that were driving the audience numbers. He brought the same forensic attention to the television business that he had brought to the music business and the vitamin water business. People who underestimated him on set, who assumed the rapper was a figurehead on the production company letterhead, tended to recalibrate fairly quickly. There is also a specific thing that 50 Cent brought to the writer's room on Power that is hard to quantify, but easy to identify when you watch the show. The world of Power, the specific texture of it, the way the characters talked and dressed and moved and made decisions, had an authenticity that you do not get from research alone. Courtney Kemp was an excellent showrunner, but she had a collaborator who had actually lived in the world the show was depicting, who knew from personal experience what the specific psychology of someone trying to go legitimate while the old world kept pulling felt like from the inside. That knowledge shaped the show in ways that no amount of research or consulting could have replicated. Between 50 Cent and other cast members, between his vision for certain story directions and what the writers wanted to do, between the demands of being both a performer in and a producer of the same show. These tensions are normal in television production, which is inherently collaborative and inherently full of strong opinions. What is notable is that 50 Cent navigated them well enough to keep the show running for 6 seasons and to maintain relationships strong enough to launch multiple spin-offs. Power was not an overnight phenomenon. Season 1 was solid. The audience grew. By Season 2, word of mouth had built it into something genuinely significant. By Season 3, Power was the most watched series in the history of the Stars network. The growth trajectory of Power across its first 3 seasons is a case study in how prestige television builds an audience. Season 1 was good enough to get people talking. Season 2 raised the stakes and deepened the characters in ways that rewarded the viewers who had stayed through Season 1 and brought in new ones. By Season 3, the word of mouth had become a force of its own, the kind of organic audience growth that no marketing budget can fully replicate. People were not watching Power because Stars told them to watch it. They were watching it because their coworker watched it and would not stop talking about it. That kind of audience is the most valuable kind in the television business because it does not turn off the moment the marketing stops. It sustains itself. It generates its own energy. And it was built, in significant part, because the show earned it. Because the writing was good enough, the performances were strong enough, the world was real enough that the audience trusted it with their time and their emotional investment. 50 Cent's role in that was real and specific. He was not just the name on the executive producer credit. He was in the room where decisions that shaped the show got made, and many of those decisions were right. Not the most watched drama, the most watched anything. The show that Stars had built its entire subscriber model around. Let me put that in context. Stars is a premium cable network. You pay extra to get it, the way you pay for HBO. For a show on that network to become the most watched series in the network's history, it needs to be the kind of show that people subscribe specifically to see. Power became that. It brought subscribers to Stars the way Game of Thrones brought subscribers to HBO. That is an enormous commercial achievement, and 50 Cent was the executive producer who made it happen. His instinct for what the audience wanted developed over years of reading rooms, reading streets, reading the temperature of the culture, turned out to apply equally well to television as it had to music. He understood story. He understood character. He understood what made people want to come back next week and the week after that. And he had a very specific vision for the world of Power that he protected aggressively throughout the production. What Power represented was not just a successful television show.
It was proof of concept for something much larger. 50 Cent had been building G-Unit Film and Television, his production company, for years before Power, signing deals, developing projects, learning the business of television from the inside the same way he had learned the business of music. He did not walk into a TV deal in 2013 and hope for the best. He had been preparing, and the skills that made him effective in music, the ability to identify talent, the willingness to invest in quality production, the ruthless understanding of what the audience actually wants rather than what you think they should want, the comfort with conflict that makes it possible to fight for creative decisions even when the network is pushing in a different direction. Those skills translated. Sometimes the things that make you good at one thing make you good at a completely different thing. Not always, but sometimes. For 50 Cent, the television world was not a consolation prize for a music career that had peaked. It was a new arena where the same fundamental qualities that had made him successful before, the intelligence, the hunger, the unwillingness to accept limits, could produce results at a scale that the music industry, even at its most generous, could not match.
The Power universe would eventually expand into 4 spin-off series. We will cover all of that in the next chapter. But in 2014, at the beginning, what mattered was simply that the show was working, that it was finding an audience, that the bet on Curtis Jackson as a television producer was being validated by the numbers. The rapper who had been declared finished after Curtis vs. Graduation was executive producing the most successful series on Starz. That is a remarkable turnaround by any measure, and it set up everything that came next. It is also worth noting what Power meant for the representation of Black stories in premium television. This was 2014. The television landscape was changing. The conversation about whose stories got told and how was getting louder. And Power was a show with a majority Black cast, set in a world that Black audiences recognized, produced by a Black executive who had earned his credibility the hardest possible way. The show was not making a statement about representation. It was just telling a story. But the fact that it worked commercially, critically, in terms of audience loyalty, made it part of a larger shift in what Hollywood believed was possible and profitable. 50 Cent understood this. He understood that G-Unit Film and Television, as a Black-owned production company with a proven track record, occupied a position in the marketplace that was genuinely valuable. Not just morally valuable, commercially valuable. There was an audience that had been underserved by the existing television infrastructure, and he was positioned to serve it. He pursued that positioning aggressively. Power was the proof of concept. The spin-offs and the other projects that followed were the expansion of the concept into a full business strategy. And now we have to talk about July 2015, because no documentary about 50 Cent that is trying to be honest skips this.
On July 13, 2015, Curtis James Jackson III filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The filing listed assets of between $10 and $50 million and liabilities of between $10 and $50 million. The headlines were immediate, enormous, and uniformly brutal. 50 Cent is broke. The man who made $100 million from vitamin water has filed for bankruptcy. The empire is over. Except, and this is important, that is not what was happening. Chapter 11 bankruptcy is not the same as being broke. Chapter 11 is a legal process by which a person or a company reorganizes their debts while continuing to operate. It is not liquidation. It is not surrendering everything you own. It is a legal tool available to anyone with complex enough finances that allows you to restructure your obligations in a way that lets you continue as a going concern. The trigger for the filing was a $5 million judgment in the Lastonia Leviston case, the sex tape situation involving Rick Ross's former partner that we mentioned earlier. $5 million is a significant sum. Combined with other debts and financial obligations, it created a situation where the structured legal process of bankruptcy reorganization was the practical way to manage the total liability. Now, and here's where it gets funny in a very 50 Cent way. Around the same time as the bankruptcy filing, he had posted photos on Instagram of himself surrounded by enormous stacks of cash, laying on cash, spelling out words with cash, doing what most people would describe as flexing extremely hard on social media, while simultaneously telling a bankruptcy court that he had financial difficulties. The judge in the bankruptcy case asked about the Instagram posts, which,
Seems fair.
The whole Instagram cash during bankruptcy episode is one of those moments in the 50 Cent story that is simultaneously funny and revealing. It is funny because the optics are absolutely terrible, and he had to have known on some level that posting pictures of yourself surrounded by cash while your lawyers are in bankruptcy court is not a great look. It is revealing because it demonstrates something about how 50 Cent thinks about his public image, which is that the image of success is itself a business asset, and maintaining that image has value that sometimes outweighs the risk of inconsistency. Whether that calculation was correct in this specific instance is debatable. The bankruptcy coverage was not kind, and the Instagram photos made it worse. But the underlying logic that projecting strength and success, even in difficult times, keeps sponsors, partners, and audiences engaged in a way that visible struggle does not, is not irrational. It is just a strategy that has a specific failure mode, and the failure mode is a bankruptcy judge asking you to explain your Instagram. He also, during the bankruptcy period, donated $100,000 to a charity for the homeless in his hometown of Queens, which is a genuinely good thing to do, and which also, characteristically, he made sure people knew about. The man understands the mechanics of reputation management, even in the middle of a reputational crisis. You have to respect the consistency, even when the specific execution leaves something to be desired. 50 Cent's explanation was that the money in the photos was borrowed or staged for promotional purposes. Whether you find that explanation satisfying probably depends on how charitable you are feeling. The judge was not entirely satisfied either and ordered him to explain the source of funds for several large payments he had made during the bankruptcy period.
The process was messy and public and generated the kind of press coverage that is extremely difficult to spin positively. The narrative of decline, which has started with Curtis versus Graduation in 2007 and accelerated through the disappointing album sales of the following years, now had a bankruptcy filing to attach itself to. The story practically wrote itself, and it was not a flattering story. But here's what actually happened with the bankruptcy. He came out the other side with his businesses substantially intact. G-Unit Film and Television continued operating. Power continued producing. His Stars deal continued generating revenue. He settled the Leviston case and resolved the other debts through the reorganization process, and emerged in 2016 with his financial and professional foundation, the television production company, the production deals, the ongoing franchise, essentially undamaged. The bankruptcy was embarrassing. The coverage was brutal. The Instagram situation was genuinely difficult to explain in a way that made him look responsible. All of that is true, but here's something about the bankruptcy period that I think gets missed in how it is usually covered. During the entire time the legal process was running, during the court hearings, the asset disclosures, the judge's questions about Instagram, all of it, Power was still in production. The Stars deal was still active. G-Unit Film and Television was still operating. The bankruptcy was a personal financial reorganization. It was not a business failure. The machine kept running even while the legal proceedings were happening, which is a reflection of both how he had structured his assets and how he continued to function professionally, even under enormous pressure.
There is a version of the bankruptcy story where someone falls apart, where the public humiliation and the financial pressure and the legal scrutiny combine into a paralysis that takes years to overcome. That is not what happened here. He kept showing up. He kept producing. He kept going to set and making decisions and running G-Unit Film and Television with the same energy he had brought to it before the financial crisis arrived. And then, when the process was over and the settlement was done, he stepped out the other side and kept building. And then it was over, and he was still standing, and Power was still running, and the empire was still there. There is a pattern here that you have probably noticed by now, because we have been watching it for 3 chapters. Curtis Jackson gets hit. Hard, sometimes, in ways that would have finished other people. The shooting, the Columbia drop, the industry blacklisting, the commercial decline, the bankruptcy. And then he gets back up.
It's much more fun to be his friend than it is to be his enemy, because this guy is f***ing relentless.
Did you ever find out who did it? Yeah, I knew who did it shortly after.
They are now where?
The guy who actually is dead.
Say one nice thing about Ja Rule.
Oh, he's alive.
I was like, I'm telling you, man, y'all got a chance right now. Just flood it. Put out a lot of music because 50 Cent is coming. 4 months later, in the club hit and it was over. Now everybody got to sit on the sidelines and wait this tidal wave out.
I actually don't want a problem.
No, I don't think you
I don't ever want a problem. But when they say they want a problem, I say no problem.
Not dramatically, not with a triumphant speech. He just gets back up and goes back to work. And the next thing you know,
He is operating at a level that the people who wrote him off did not expect. It is, by this point in his story, the most consistent thing about him. More consistent than the music, more consistent than the beefs, more consistent than any other single quality. He gets up.
And I want to be careful not to make this sound like a motivational poster, because it is not. The quality of getting back up is not automatically admirable regardless of what you do when you're upright. Getting back up and making good decisions is admirable. Getting back up and making questionable decisions is just persistent. 50 Cent has done both. He has made decisions that were genuinely impressive. The equity deals, the TV production company, the strategic use of conflict as attention, and decisions that were costly or cruel, or both. The pattern of resilience does not erase the pattern of error. It exists alongside it. What makes the story compelling is not that he is good or bad or hero or villain. It is that he is relentlessly, exhaustingly, fascinatingly himself. In every situation, under every kind of pressure, with every kind of opportunity, and every kind of obstacle, he responds with the same fundamental character, the same calculation, the same refusal, the same forward motion. So here is where we are as we move out of this chapter and into the final one. The year is 2016. The bankruptcy is resolved. Power is a certified hit. G-Unit Film and Television is a functioning production company with real results. The rap career has slowed. He has not had a major commercial album in several years, but the music has never fully stopped. He is 40 years old. He has 9 bullets still in his body. He has survived the shooting and the blacklisting and the commercial decline and the legal battles and the public embarrassments. He has built a television franchise from scratch. He has $100 million from a water company sitting in the foundation of everything he does next. And the world in 2016, 2017, 2018 is about to give him a new set of targets, a new set of platforms, and a new set of opportunities to demonstrate the quality that has defined him since he was a 12-year-old kid on the corners of South Jamaica, Queens. Which is that he is going to do whatever it takes, as long as it takes, against whoever or whatever is standing in the way. What comes next is the era that finally closes the loop between the streets he came from and the empire he built on top of them. And it is more entertaining than you might think. There is a Las Vegas residency that grosses $15 million. There is a documentary about Diddy that he executive produces for Netflix, and that becomes one of the most talked about projects of 2025. There is a beef with T.I. There is a $100 million nightclub deal in Times Square. There is a Hulu docuseries about his own life, greenlit after a bidding war involving Netflix, Apple, and Starz, that begins as an April Fool's joke and turns out to be completely real, which is the most 50 Cent ending to any story that has ever existed. All of that is in Chapter 4. We are almost at the end of the full story, and the end is genuinely not what you expect. Because here's the thing about 50 Cent in 2024, 2025, and 2026 that defies every narrative arc that the entertainment industry usually assigns to people like him. He is not in nostalgia mode. He is not doing legacy tours and greatest hits packages and letting people celebrate what he used to be. He is building new things, signing new deals, starting new conflicts, making moves that would be ambitious for someone in their 30s, let alone someone who has been at the top of the entertainment industry for over 2 decades and has 9 bullets permanently embedded in his body. The story is not over, not even close. Chapter 4. The bankruptcy is resolved. Power is running. The production company is intact. And Curtis Jackson, 40 years old, is standing on the other side of a period that would have finished most people with a very clear sense of where he is going next.
Here's the thing about surviving a public financial crisis that most people do not account for. It changes how you think about money. Not in the obvious way, not just be more careful, save more, spend less, but in a deeper way. When you have built and lost and rebuilt and nearly lost again, you develop a specific kind of clarity about what actually matters, about which assets are real and which are performance, about the difference between looking wealthy and being wealthy. The bankruptcy stripped some illusions away. What was left underneath was a production company, a franchise, and a set of business instincts that had been refined over 2 decades of trial and very public error. He was not starting over. He was continuing, with less baggage, with sharper focus, and with the particular energy of a man who has just been told by the world that his moment has passed and has decided, once again, that the world
is wrong. The music in this period tells an interesting story if you pay attention to it. He kept releasing tracks, collabs, Lucy's, featured verses, at a pace that refused to let people forget he was still active. He announced a 6th solo album called Street King Immortal multiple times over multiple years, with release dates that came and went without the album materializing. The ongoing album tease became something of a running joke in hip-hop circles. Street King Immortal was the album that was always coming, but never arrived. The rap world's version of a sequel that keeps getting delayed.
What is interesting about that pattern is not the failure to release. Plenty of albums get announced and then shelved. It happens constantly. But what it reveals about his priorities. In the period when Street King Immortal was supposedly coming, he was also building the Power universe, closing the Sire Spirit deals, developing BMF, and eventually doing the final lap tour. The music kept getting deprioritized because the other things were generating better returns per unit of attention. He is not a man who does things out of habit or obligation. He does things because they make strategic sense. And in 2016, 2017, 2018, the strategic case for pouring energy into a new album was significantly weaker than the strategic case for the television business. That said, he never stopped being a rapper in any meaningful sense. He appeared on other people's records, he performed live, he stayed connected to the music industry relationships that mattered. The rap identity was not something he shed on the way to becoming a television executive. It was the foundation that everything else was built on, and he maintained it even when the commercial music output had slowed to a trickle. It is also worth noting what he was walking into in 2016 from a cultural standpoint, because the landscape he was navigating was dramatically different from the one he had entered in 2003. Hip-hop was now the dominant popular music genre in America, not competing for the top, actually there. Rap artists were the biggest sellers, the most streamed, the most culturally central figures in American music. The thing that 50 Cent had spent his career doing was now the center of the conversation.
But the specific version of it that he represented, the hard, street-certified, Queens-rooted, conflict-driven sound and image of the early 2000s, was not the version that was dominant in 2016. That space belonged to Drake, to Kendrick Lamar, to Future, to artists who were doing something different with the genre's possibilities. 50 Cent was not competing in their lane. He was building in a different direction entirely, toward television, toward hospitality, toward the kind of business diversification that exists completely outside of what genre is popular this year. That was the right call. Not because music was finished for him, he continued making music throughout this period, but because the business of music had changed in ways that made the television and spirits and live entertainment opportunities more valuable per unit of effort. He read the landscape and made adjustments. Quietly, without announcing that he was pivoting, without a press release explaining his strategy, he just started doing different things and let the results speak. Power ended in February 2020 after 6 seasons, and the ending was exactly the kind of event that prestige television builds toward. Major character deaths, resolved storylines, the kind of finale that people watched live and then immediately started arguing about online. It was a genuine cultural moment. The show had earned it. But Power did not simply end. It multiplied. G-Unit Film and Television and Stars announced a Power universe, 4 spin-off series, each following a different character from the original show into their own story. This is the television equivalent of what 50 Cent had done with G-Unit in 2003, taking a successful platform and using it to launch multiple additional acts, each with their own commercial trajectory, all orbiting the same central brand.
The first spin-off was Power Book 2 Ghost, following Tariq St. Patrick, Ghost's son, into college, where he is dealing drugs to pay his tuition while simultaneously trying to go legitimate. If that irony sounds familiar, it should. The show premiered in September 2020 and became the most-watched series premiere in Starz history. Let me just read that back to you. The spin-off of the show that was already the most-watched series in Starz history had the most-watched premiere in Starz history. The franchise was not just holding, it was growing. Power Book 3, Raising Kanan, came next, and this one was personal in a very specific way. It is set in South Jamaica, Queens, in the early 1990s. It is the origin story of Kanan Stark, 50 Cent's character from the original show, showing how he became the man we met in Power.
which means that 50 Cent, as executive producer, was overseeing the dramatization of a fictionalized version of his own childhood neighborhood, his own era, his own formative years, the streets he grew up on, the world that shaped him, translated into prestige television. Raising Kanan was widely considered the best of the spin-offs, the most emotionally grounded, the most cinematically ambitious, the most willing to sit with complexity rather than just deliver plot. It ran for 3 seasons and built a passionate, loyal audience. Power Book 4, Force, followed Tommy Egan, Ghost's partner from the original show, to Chicago, where he attempts to build a new drug empire from scratch. It went in a slightly different direction geographically and tonally from the Queens-rooted earlier entries in the universe, which was deliberate. Each spin-off needed its own identity. Force found one. Power Book 5, Influence, following Councilman Rashad Tate, was in development as of 2025. We are, at the time of this documentary being made, still waiting for it. Given the track record of every other entry in the Power universe, the bar of expectation is high.
4 spin-offs from one show, all on Stars, all executive produced by G-Unit Film and Television, all generating production fees, creative credits, and ongoing revenue for Curtis Jackson's company. The Power universe is not a television franchise. It is a business, a very well-constructed, very profitable, very durable business that has been running continuously for over a decade. And I want to dwell on what this means from a business perspective, because it tends to get reported as a creative success. Great show, great spin-offs, good for him, without full appreciation of the financial architecture underneath it. When you executive produce a show for a network, you collect a production fee per episode. When you own the production company that makes multiple shows for the same network, those fees multiply. When those shows generate subscriber growth for the network has strong financial incentives to keep renewing your shows and to give your next project favorable terms. 50 Cent was not just making good television, he was building negotiating leverage with stars that made every subsequent deal better than the one before it. There were tensions along the way, as there always are in any long-running business relationship. 50 Cent and Stars had public disagreements about marketing spend, about how aggressively the network was promoting the Power universe, about money owed on various deals. He aired some of these agreements publicly, on social media and interviews, which is not the conventional approach to managing a relationship with your primary distribution partner, but is entirely consistent with how he handles every relationship in which he feels he is being undervalued. What is notable is that despite those public tensions, the relationship continued. The spin-offs kept getting made. The money kept flowing. Stars needed the Power universe as much as, probably more than, the Power universe needed Stars. And 50 Cent knew it. And Stars knew that he knew it. That dynamic is the definition of leverage. And leverage is the thing he has been building toward his entire career. And then, in 2021, he launched a second franchise entirely. BMF, Black Mafia Family, is the true story of Demetrius and Terry Flannery, 2 brothers from Detroit who built one of the most successful and far-reaching drug trafficking organizations in American history in the 1990s and early 2000s. At its peak, the Black Mafia family was moving enormous quantities of cocaine across the country through a network that spanned dozens of cities. They were also, almost simultaneously, building a music label called BMF Entertainment and inserting themselves into the hip-hop industry in ways that blurred the line between street enterprise and entertainment business in a manner that was, to put it gently, not legal. The story is extraordinary. It has everything: brotherhood, ambition, betrayal, federal investigation, the specific texture of what it means to build something enormous from nothing through means that the law does not recognize. It is, in certain ways, a story that runs parallel to the 50 Cent story in its themes, even if the specifics are completely different. 50 Cent executive produced BMF for Stars. It premiered in September 2021 and ran for 4 seasons. His own son, Marquise Jackson, the estrangement between them notwithstanding, appeared in the show in a small role during the first season, which created its own layer of public commentary and awkwardness that was entirely consistent with how the father-son relationship had been playing out. BMF proves something important. The Power universe's success was not a lucky accident specific to that particular story. 50 Cent and G-Unit Film and Television could develop a completely separate franchise from scratch with different characters and a different world and build it into a successful ongoing series.
The production company had genuine creative and commercial capability that transcended any single project. There is also something worth noting about why 50 Cent was drawn to the BMF story specifically. The Flannery brothers built something enormous through sheer intelligence and will, and a complete disregard for the conventional rules about what was possible. They were told by the world around them what their options were, and they decided that those options were insufficient, and went and created different ones. The parallels to a certain South Jamaica Queen story are not subtle. He recognized something in them. The story of people who refused the limits that were assigned to them is a story he has been telling in various forms his entire career. By 2022 and 2023, Curtis Jackson was executive producing multiple ongoing series simultaneously. There was also, during this period, a growing body of true crime and documentary content that G-Unit Film and Television was producing beyond the flagship franchises. Shows exploring real criminal cases, hip-hop-related violence, major news stories. Content that leveraged the production infrastructure he had built for Power and BMF, but operated at a lower cost and in a different genre. This was smart diversification. True crime content is cheaper to produce than scripted drama. It travels well across platforms, and it keeps the production company's output high even between major scripted seasons. He was building a production company that could run multiple genres simultaneously, reducing the dependence on any single type of content.
The scope of what G-Unit Film and Television became by 2024 is genuinely impressive when you lay it out flat. Multiple ongoing scripted series, a catalog of documentary and true crime content, a studio facility in Louisiana that gave him physical production infrastructure he owned rather than rented, deals with multiple platforms, a roster of showrunners, writers, and production staff who had been developed within the company across a decade. This was not a celebrity production company that existed primarily on paper. It was a functioning creative enterprise with real output and real institutional knowledge. Power Book 2 Ghost, Raising Kanan, Force, BMF, plus various other projects in development. He was not a rapper who had pivoted to television. He was a television executive, one of the most productive and commercially successful ones on premium cable, who had a rap career as part of his biography. In 2023, 20 years after Get Rich or Die Trying changed the world, 50 Cent went on tour. The Final Lap Tour was a celebration of that debut album's 20th anniversary, and the scale of it was a direct and unambiguous answer to every narrative of decline that had been written about him over the previous decade. He played arenas, worldwide, not theaters, not smaller venues where a diminished audience could still feel the seats. Arenas. The tour grossed enormous numbers. Critics who had not been paying attention to 50 Cent in years went to the shows and came back with a version of the same report. The audience was enormous, the energy was extraordinary, and the man himself performed with an urgency and a presence that made it feel less like a nostalgia event and more like something genuinely alive. There is a specific kind of performance that artists who have been through what he has been through can sometimes access that younger, more comfortable performers simply cannot. It is the performance of someone who knows on a cellular level what it means to almost not be there, who is aware in a way that cannot be manufactured that the room, the audience, the moment is not guaranteed, who stands on a stage with 9 bullets still in his body and sings about getting rich or dying trying, and means every single word of it in a way that goes beyond performance into something that is very hard to name.
You show people that you're not willing to fight, they want to fight. Right. Do you want to feel like you're afraid all the time? Or do you start to become the aggressor? And you start saying, you know what? You ain't got to find me because I'm looking for you. And then it changes everything.
The Final Lap Tour was also, characteristically, accompanied by 50 Cent's social media presence doing exactly what his social media presence does, generating controversy, humor, and engagement in approximately equal measure. He posted about the tour, about his ticket sales versus other artists, about the business. He kept the cameras rolling at all times on his own life in the specific way that only he does, which is simultaneously oversharing and completely controlled. The tour made money, a lot of it. At 47 years old, he was still one of the most bankable live performers in hip-hop. That is not something you can fake. That is earned and kept, and it means something. The Final Lap Tour also had a specific emotional quality to it that distinguished it from pure nostalgia tours of the kind that older artists sometimes fall back on. This was not 50 Cent standing on stage saying, "Remember this?" and expecting the audience to provide all the energy. He brought the energy.
He was performing with an intensity that people in the audience consistently described as surprising. Surprising not because they expected it to be bad, but because they did not expect it to feel urgent. 20 years after the album, the urgency was still there. Where that urgency comes from is probably not a complicated question if you have been paying attention for the last 4 hours.
The Final Lap Tour also had a practical business dimension that reflects how 50 Cent thinks about live performance. He did not just play arenas. He structured the tour in a way that maximized revenue across multiple categories. The VIP packages, the merchandise, the brand partnerships attached to the tour, the media coverage that kept the name in circulation throughout the entire run. Every aspect of the touring enterprise was monetized thoughtfully, not just the ticket sales. By the end of the run, the tour had generated the kind of numbers that demonstrated conclusively and to anyone who had written off his live drawing power that the audience was still there. The tour also produced something less tangible but equally valuable, which was a reminder to the music industry of what 50 Cent's catalog actually represents. When you put 20 years of his biggest songs in sequence and perform them in arenas, the strength of that catalog becomes undeniable. In the Club, Many Men, Candy Shop, 21 Questions, PIMP, In My Hood, Hustler's Ambition. The list of legitimate crowd moments is longer than most artists accumulate in a career. You cannot fake that. The songs either hold up or they do not. And in arena after arena on the Final Lap Tour, they held up completely. It comes from the same place everything else comes from a boy who lost his mother at 8, from the knowledge embedded at a level below conscious thought that nothing is guaranteed, that the room full of people screaming your lyrics back at you is not a permanent condition, that you perform like it matters because it does matter every single time, because you know better than most people what it looks like when it gets taken away. The Final Lap Tour led directly into something that would have sounded like satire if you had described it to someone in 2009, when Before I Self-Destruct was underperforming and the narrative was all about decline.
From December 2024 into January 2025, 50 Cent ran a Las Vegas residency, 6 shows at Planet Hollywood, called, with perfect simplicity, Into Club. The residency grossed $15 million. $15 million. 6 shows in Las Vegas at 49 years old. Las Vegas residencies are, in the entertainment world, a very specific kind of validation. They are reserved for artists who have achieved a level of proven draw that justifies the infrastructure costs of a dedicated production. The stage, the lighting, the sound, the venue deal. The list of artists who have headlined Vegas residencies is a list of people who have reached a specific tier of commercial durability. Celine Dion, Elton John, Britney Spears, Beyonce, and now Curtis James Jackson III from South Jamaica, Queens, who sold crack at 12 and got shot 9 times at 24. He sold out every single night. Means an average of $2.5 million per show. For context, a headlining arena show on a major tour might net an artist somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million after costs, depending on the market and the deal. The residency model, when it works, produces better margins than touring for a fraction of the logistical overhead. 50 Cent, who has always been as interested in the financial structure of a deal as in the creative content, understood this. The Las Vegas residency was not just a victory lap. It was a well-structured business decision.
Through all of this, the TV production, the touring, the residency, Sire Spirits was continuing to grow. The premium liquor portfolio that 50 Cent had been building expanded its international distribution in 2024 and 2025, moving into markets in Europe and beyond. The vitamin water playbook, remember. You use the fame while you have it to build equity in real businesses. The fame does not last forever. The equity, if you built it properly, if the underlying business is genuinely good, does. Sire Spirits was not a celebrity label slapped on someone else's product. It was a properly run premium spirits company with real distribution infrastructure and genuine brand positioning in a competitive market. He also, during this period, got involved in a $50 million entertainment district project in Shreveport, Louisiana, a development project connected to his G-Unit Films Louisiana studio that he had opened in 2023. This part of the story is less glamorous than the Las Vegas residency and less dramatic than the Diddy documentary, but it matters for understanding the full picture of what he has built. He is not just an entertainer. He is a developer, a builder of physical infrastructure in communities that are not the ones that usually attract entertainment investment. Shreveport is not Los Angeles. It is not New York. It is a mid-sized city in northwest Louisiana with a complicated economic history and a complicated relationship with the entertainment industry. The fact that 50 Cent was putting real money into a development project there, not a photo opportunity, an actual construction project, says something about his approach to business that deserves acknowledgement. And now we arrive at the chapter of the 50 Cent story that in 2024 and 2025 made more headlines than anything he had done since the Get Rich or Die Trying era, the Sean Combs documentary.
To understand this, you need a little context about the relationship between Curtis Jackson and Sean Combs over the years. They were never close friends. 50 Cent has been clear about this. He ghost wrote some material for Combs early in his career. They were professional acquaintances in the same industry, but there was no personal warmth. There was, if anything, a low-grade mutual wariness between two men who were both deeply protective of their territory and their image. Over the years, 50 Cent had made occasional sharp comments about Diddy. Nothing that rose to the level of a full beef, but consistent enough that the antagonism was documented. He had posted on social media about him during the period when allegations against Combs were beginning to surface publicly. He was vocal before most people in hip-hop were willing to be vocal. In 2024, Sean Combs was arrested on federal charges including transportation to engage in prostitution, related to a pattern of alleged behavior toward women that had been the subject of civil lawsuits and was now the subject of criminal prosecution. The charges and the accompanying evidence that became public through the legal process sent shockwaves through hip-hop and through the broader entertainment world. Combs had been one of the most powerful figures in the music industry for 3 decades. The scale of what was alleged was staggering. 50 Cent was not the only person talking about it, but he was among the loudest and the quickest, and he was also, unlike most of the people talking about it, doing something about it. He announced he was executive producing a documentary about the case for Netflix, Sean Combs: The Reckoning.
The documentary dropped on December 2nd, 2025. It became immediately one of the most discussed projects on the platform. It was serious, well-made journalism about a serious subject. Not a gossip piece, not a sensationalized retelling, but a documentary that treated the subject with the weight it warranted. 50 Cent spoke about why he chose to be involved. He told Good Morning America that silence would be interpreted as complicity, that if people in the hip-hop world who knew about the culture around Combs said nothing, the message to the world would be that hip-hop was okay with it. He did not want to send that message. He also donated a significant portion of the documentary's proceeds to domestic violence nonprofits, which is either a genuinely good act motivated by genuine concern, or an act motivated by reputation management, or both, or something complicated in between. And honestly, the distinction matters less than the fact that money went to organizations helping people who needed it. The reaction in hip-hop was complicated. Some people respected him for speaking up when others were quiet. Others were skeptical of his motives, noting that he had a long pre-existing antagonism toward Combs and was not exactly a disinterested party. Both reactions are understandable. The truth is probably that his motives were mixed.
This is some real shit. Mike Tyson called me. Floyd was getting ready to go to jail. We at the M Casino. Mike Tyson said, "Come here, let me talk to you for a second." Because he pulled me outside the door. The nigga pushed the door. Then the door opened. He came outside. He said, "Yo, I used to hate that nigga." The nigga voice changed. It got deep. You know how Mike Tyson is like, yeah. He all the way up here to say, yo, I used to hate that nigga. I said, oh shit. Look, I'm like, look. So I'm sitting there going, I got to fight this nigga, right? I'm thinking I might have to fight him.
Genuine concern for the victims and their stories, combined with the knowledge that being the person who spoke up about Diddy when others were silent was not going to hurt his public standing. Curtis Jackson has never in his life done a thing for only one reason. That is not weakness. That is just how complicated people work. In 2025, 50 Cent was involved in a very public and very personal beef with T.I., Clifford Harris from Atlanta, one of the defining artists of Southern rap, and a man with his own enormous career and his own complicated public history.
I want to be careful about how I characterize the T.I. situation, because it got genuinely personal on both sides in ways that involved people beyond just the two artists. What I will say is this:
It demonstrated, if there was anyone left who needed demonstrating to, that 50 Cent, at 49 years old, approaches conflict with exactly the same energy that 50 Cent at 27 years old did. He does not soften. He does not recalibrate toward diplomacy as he ages. He does not decide at some point that he is too old and too successful to get into it with people. This is simultaneously one of the most exhausting things about him and one of the most fascinating. Most public figures, as they accumulate age and wealth and legacy, become more careful, more protective, more interested in their historical reputation than in winning the specific conflict in front of them. 50 Cent shows no signs of this. He is as willing to go to war on Instagram at 49 as he was to hand out mixtapes in Queens at 27. The medium has changed, the bandwidth has not. The T.I. beef wound down eventually, the way most of these conflicts do. Not with a formal resolution, not with a handshake and a press release, just with a gradual reduction in temperature as both men moved on to other things. But while it was hot, and it kept 50 Cent in a cultural conversation in a way that reminded everyone that he was still here, still engaged, still impossible to ignore.
The T.I. situation also highlighted something that has become increasingly clear in the later chapters of 50 Cent's story. His conflicts are no longer primarily about positioning within the music industry. They are not about who sells more records or who is more credible on the street. They are about maintaining relevance, staying in the public conversation, reminding people that he is still here and still worth paying attention to. The beefs have always served this function to some degree, but in the 2020s, with the rap career in a different phase, the function is more visible. Whether that is something to admire or something to roll your eyes at probably depends on how much you enjoy the content. Personally, I find it more interesting than most critics do. There is something genuinely entertaining about a 50-year-old man with a $100 million water company exit still showing up to argue on social media with the same energy he had at 27, in a way that reminded everyone that he was still here, still engaged, still impossible to ignore. In June 2025, a New York City mayoral candidate named Zoran Mamdani posted a video explaining his tax policy. The policy involved higher taxes on wealthy New Yorkers to fund various social programs. It was a standard progressive platform position of the kind that gets debated in every major American city. 50 Cent saw the video, posted it to Instagram with a caption that said he was not feeling the plan and that he would personally pay the candidate $258,000 and a first-class one-way ticket out of New York, and that he was going to tell Trump about it too. The internet had opinions about this.
Here's the thing about 50 Cent's political commentary over the years, which has been consistent enough to constitute an actual ideological position, even if it does not map neatly onto either party. He is fundamentally, completely, without apology, interested in protecting his money. When something threatens his money, a tax policy, a candidate, a regulation, he says so. When something does not threaten his money, he is largely indifferent to the political dimension of it. This is not a sophisticated political philosophy, but it is at least an honest one, which is more than you can say for a lot of political commentary from wealthy public figures. He has never pretended to be a progressive champion. He has never pretended to be a conservative hero. He publicly supported George W. Bush in 2005, which alienated a significant portion of his fan base. He made comments during the 2020 election that suggested he was considering voting for Trump before apparently reversing course. He posts things that get him in trouble with the political left and things that get him in trouble with the political right, usually within the same week. What he is politically is a man from South Jamaica, Queens, who grew up with nothing, who made an enormous amount of money through intelligence and work and luck, and who is extremely attentive to anything that might affect his ability to keep that money. You may find that position admirable or appalling, or somewhere in between. He does not particularly care which. In early 2026, 50 Cent announced what may be his most ambitious business move since the vitamin water equity deal over 20 years earlier. Live,
a partnership with Planet Hollywood and its chairman, Robert Earl, valued at $100 million, to create a celebrity-driven entertainment venue inside Planet Hollywood's flagship Times Square location in New York City. The venue would be built around immersive LED technology, live music performances, sports viewing events, exclusive experiences, and a menu that included 50 Cent's personal selections. One night might be a surprise concert. The next might be a championship watch party. The flexibility was built into the architecture. He announced it on Instagram with a caption that said, "When I get quiet, I'm working," which, for a man who was never genuinely quiet, is a statement that should be understood as aspirational rather than literal. Times Square. Think about that location for a moment. Times Square is the single most visited tourist destination in the United States. 40 million people pass through it every year. A venue there is not just a nightclub or a restaurant. It is a platform that sits in the center of the most visible intersection in the country and receives foot traffic that no marketing campaign can replicate. Planet Hollywood has always been built on the concept of celebrity as environment. The idea that people will pay to be in a space that is saturated with the presence and the brand of famous people. 50 Cent is not attaching his name to someone else's concept. He is a partner. He has equity. He has creative input into what the space becomes. The vitamin water lesson. Apply to hospitality. The deal was announced and the reactions ranged from enthusiastic to skeptical. Times Square hospitality is a brutally competitive and frequently humbling business. Very expensive things have opened there and closed without generating the sustained success they were designed for. The concept needs to work as a business, not just as an announcement.
But as an announcement, as a signal of where 50 Cent's ambitions are pointed in 2026, Live says exactly what it is meant to say. He is not winding down. He is building something new in the middle of New York City, in the most visible possible location, at 50 years old, with the same energy he has brought to every other project he has ever undertaken. The Times Square location is significant for reasons that go beyond foot traffic. Times Square is the place people go to celebrate, to mark occasions, to be in the center of things. Opening a celebrity-driven entertainment venue there is a play for the broadest possible audience, one that goes well beyond any single demographic that has defined him at any point in his career. And it is located in his home city. South Jamaica, Queens is maybe 15 miles from Times Square. The boy who grew up there, who sold drugs on its corners, who buried his mother in that borough, is now putting his name on a $100 million entertainment venue in the most visible commercial location in the city. Not in Las Vegas, not in Los Angeles, in New York. His city, his story, his name on the building, in the most visible possible location. At 50 years old, with the same energy he has brought to every other project he has ever undertaken. And now we arrive at the thing that made me want to end this documentary where it ends, which is April 2026, because it is the perfect conclusion to the story we have been telling for the past 4 hours. On April 1st, 2026, April Fool's Day, 50 Cent posted on Instagram that Hulu had paid $75 million for a documentary about his life. He said it had beaten out Netflix, Starz, and Apple in a bidding war. He said it was $75 million. Everyone assumed it was a joke. Of course they did. It was April Fool's Day. It was 50 Cent. The number was absurdly large. It was the most obvious troll in the history of trolling. Except it was not a joke.
Deadline confirmed it. Variety confirmed it. Hulu officially announced it. A 3-part docuseries about the life of Curtis James Jackson III, from his childhood in South Jamaica, Queens, to the present day, was genuinely greenlit and in production. The exact dollar figure remained unconfirmed. The 75 million number was almost certainly either exaggerated or the most classic April Fool's misdirection in entertainment industry history. But the show itself was real. It will be directed by Mandon Lovett, whose previous credits include serious documentary work on hip-hop and American culture. It is executive produced by 50 Cent himself through G-Unit Film and Television, alongside producers Eli Holtzman and Aaron Seidman from IPC. Patrick Altima is the showrunner. The logline describes it as a portrait of someone who has relentlessly reinvented himself while redefining the rules of power, influence, and success, which is, if you have spent 4 hours watching this documentary, an accurate description. Now,
I need you to appreciate the full picture here because it is genuinely extraordinary. In December 2025, 50 Cent's documentary about the fall of Diddy dropped on Netflix. In April 2026, his documentary about his own rise was greenlit for Hulu. In the span of 5 months, he produced a documentary about his enemy's downfall on one major streaming platform and announced a documentary about his own life on a competing major streaming platform. This is not a coincidence. This is a chess move. This is a man who has understood from the beginning that narrative control is power, that the person who gets to tell the story owns the story, and who has, in his 50s, found a way to exercise that control at a scale and in a medium that was not available to him when he was handing out mixtapes in 1999.
The mixtapes were him telling his own story directly to the audience because the gatekeepers would not let him through the official door. The Hulu docuseries is the same impulse with a streaming budget behind it. Same man, same instinct. 40 million more people watching. There is also something specifically satisfying about the Hulu deal coming after the Netflix Diddy documentary, and I suspect 50 Cent appreciates this on a level he may or may not say out loud. He produced a documentary about someone else's fall for Netflix. He secured a documentary about his own rise for Hulu. He is, in 2026, on 2 competing streaming platforms simultaneously in opposite narrative directions. One story goes down, one story goes up. He is connected to both of them. He produced both of them. He controls the framing of both of them. If you had tried to design the most 50 Cent possible ending to the most 50 Cent possible story, you could not have done better than this. The man who spent 2 years in the industry wilderness in 2000 and 2001, handing out free CDs because no one would give him a platform, is in 2026 simultaneously on Netflix and Hulu. The man the industry blacklisted is now producing the content that major streaming platforms are competing over. Columbia Records dropped him in 2000 because he was a liability. Hulu had a bidding war over his life story in 2026. The 26 years between those two facts contain everything we have spent the last 4 hours talking about. The 9 bullets and the recovery, the mixtapes in the barbershops, the Eminem cosign and the debut album, the vitamin water equity deal and the $100 million exit, the Kanye sales loss and the recalibration, the Power Universe and the bankruptcy and the G-Unit reunion, the Las Vegas residency and the Diddy documentary and the Times Square nightclub and the Hulu deal.
And then, beyond all the specifics, at the base of all of it, a child from South Jamaica, Queens, who lost his mother at 8 and learned that the world was not going to protect him, who decided very early and very clearly that the only person he could fully depend on was himself, who built everything on top of that foundation through every setback and every success, and every moment where the story could have ended differently, who was still building at 50 years old with 9 bullets in his body and a Hulu documentary in production and a $100 million Times Square deal in progress. The story is not finished. Stories like this one do not finish cleanly. They keep going, generating new chapters, new moves, new conflicts, new consequences. The man who has been the most consistent thing in his own story for 50 years is not about to stop being consistent now. Whatever comes next for Curtis James Jackson III, one thing is certain. There is a question that gets asked about people like him. People who have survived genuinely extraordinary circumstances and gone on to build genuinely extraordinary things. The question is, what made the difference? What separated this person from the hundreds of people in the same circumstances who did not make it out, who did not build the empire, who did not survive to be the subject of a 4-hour documentary?
The honest answer is that we do not fully know. It is talent, certainly. It is the specific set of skills that his environment sharpened in him. It is the Eminem tape reaching the right person at the right moment. It is the 9 bullets not hitting anything fatal. It is the vitamin water deal closing before the market shifted. It is 1,000 moments where things could have gone differently and did not. The story of Curtis Jackson is a story about human capability and human will, yes, but it is also a story about the specific way that contingency interacts with capability. The luck that found him because he put himself in enough situations for luck to find him. What we can say with certainty is that whatever the combination of factors that produced him, the result is one of the most durably interesting public figures of the last half-century, a man who has given us music and television and business strategy and social media comedy and public beef and private heartbreak and everything in between.
who has been more honest about some parts of his life than almost anyone in his position, and more guarded about others than you would expect from someone so publicly engaged, who is, 50 years in, still a genuinely open question, still building, still moving, still here. Whatever comes next for Curtis James Jackson III, one thing is certain: he is going to tell you about it himself, on his own terms, in the medium that serves him best that particular week. Because controlling the frame is not a strategy he adopted, it is who he is. It has always been who he is. That arc, from the music industry writing him off to streaming platforms fighting over him, covers 26 years of relentless, unkillable forward motion. It is one of the most complete reversals in the history of the entertainment business.
While all of this was happening, 50 Cent was also preparing to appear in the Street Fighter reboot film. Yes, Street Fighter, the video game franchise, now a movie. He plays a character called Easy Day, which is a name I am choosing to take as evidence that whoever cast him has a sense of humor, because there has been nothing easy about any day in Curtis Jackson's life. The Street Fighter casting is interesting beyond the obvious novelty of it, because it represents something about where he wants to go as an actor. He has done crime drama, he has done television. The franchise action film is a different category entirely, the one where the biggest global money lives, where the international audience is largest, where the brand extends furthest. If the film works, if the franchise continues, it opens doors to a part of the entertainment industry that even his television success has not yet reached. Power Book 5 Influence was still in development at the time of this documentary. The full Power universe is not yet complete. Sire Spirits was continuing to expand internationally. The Shreveport Entertainment District was under development. Live was being built. The Hulu documentary was in production. He is not winding down. He does not know how to wind down. The concept appears to be genuinely foreign to him at the level of personality. Consider the math of his current schedule for a moment. He is executive producing multiple ongoing television series. He is running a production company with projects in development. He is managing an international spirits brand. He is building a physical entertainment venue in Times Square. He is executive producing his own biographical documentary for Hulu. He is preparing for a franchise film. And somewhere in all of this, he is also somehow still posting on Instagram constantly, somehow still finding time to be in public beefs, somehow still courtside at NBA games in Sacramento and Indianapolis.
There is a specific kind of energy that some people have, where doing less is genuinely not available to them as an option, not as laziness, not as an unwillingness to slow down, but as a fundamental incompatibility with stillness at the level of character. Curtis Jackson is that kind of person. He has been running at full speed since he was 12 years old, and he has not found a reason to stop. We have been telling this story for 4 hours now, and I think the ending of it requires some honesty. Not just about the achievements, which are real and remarkable and deserve the full treatment we have given them, but about the full picture of the man. Because if we only tell the triumph and skip the damage, we are making a hagiography. And that is not what this documentary is.
If I had one person in the world that I could give everything that I have to and I'd be comfortable with it, it'd be my grandmother. Because I know before she did anything, she'd think about me.
Right.
You know what I mean? My granddaddy, his heart is so giving that he'd give my money away. To my uncles and aunts and everybody else.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Curtis Jackson has caused harm. Not hypothetically, not as a footnote, directly, and in ways that left real marks on real people. The Young Buck phone call was cruel. The distribution of the Leviston tape was a violation of a woman who had nothing to do with his conflict with Rick Ross. The public estrangement from Marquise is a wound that has not healed and that a father's choices made worse. The relentlessness that makes him extraordinary in professional contexts is the same relentlessness that, in personal ones, can become something very difficult to be on the receiving end of. These are not small things. They deserve to be said clearly, not buried in a sentence between two achievement paragraphs.
There's a version of the 50 Cent story that turns him into pure inspiration, the rags to riches narrative, the survival story, the man who overcame everything and built an empire. That version is available, and parts of it are true, and it is a genuinely compelling story. But it leaves out the people who got hurt along the way. It leaves out Lastonia Leviston, who had her privacy violated as a weapon in someone else's conflict. It leaves out Young Buck, whose breaking point was made into entertainment. It leaves out Marquise, who had to grow up with a father whose default mode of conflict resolution is to escalate publicly. The people who make the most interesting subjects for documentaries are almost never straightforwardly good or bad. There is also a version of the 50 Cent story that is told from the perspective of the people who were in his orbit and got hurt. LaStonia Leviston, whose private life became ammunition in someone else's conflict. Young Buck, whose lowest moment was turned into public entertainment. Marquise Jackson, who grew up in the shadow of a famous and often absent father who chose to conduct their estrangement on social media. These are real people with real experiences of what it is like to be on the receiving end of Curtis Jackson's particular combination of brilliance and ruthlessness.
That version of the story is also true. It exists alongside the version we have been telling for 4 hours, the version about survival and resilience and building something from nothing. Both versions are true simultaneously. The man who survived 9 bullets and built an empire is also the man who made choices that caused real harm to real people who did not deserve it. Holding both of those things in your head at the same time is not comfortable, but it is honest. And the honest version of a story is always more interesting than the clean one. They are people whose gifts and their damage come from the same source, expressed through the same behaviors, making it impossible to fully separate the remarkable from the troubling. Curtis Jackson is that kind of person. His relentlessness made him. It also, in specific moments, hurt people who deserved better. Both things are permanently true. And at the same time, these are not the whole picture. The man who released that phone call is also the man who spent 2 years handing out CDs in barbershops because he believed in his own music when no one else would. The man who had a public feud with his son is also the man who made a film about his mother's death and put it out into the world because he needed to say something about it that words alone had never been able to say. The man who escalated the Rick Ross conflict past the point of wisdom is also the man who donated the proceeds from the Diddy documentary to domestic violence organizations.
Human beings are not one thing. They are not the best version of themselves, and they are not the worst version. They are the whole thing, the full range, the contradictions running alongside each other for the entire duration of a life. Curtis Jackson is brilliant and ruthless and occasionally cruel and genuinely funny and intermittently generous and relentlessly ambitious and deeply, clearly, still carrying the loss of his mother from when he was 8 years old in ways that continue to shape everything he does. That is the complete picture, not the highlight reel and not the lowlight reel, the whole film. It is April 2026. Curtis James Jackson III is 50 years old. He rang in 2026 with back-to-back New Year's Eve appearances, 3 separate events in a single night, including a pre-taped spot on national television. 3 gigs in one night at 50 years old, while simultaneously running a production company with multiple active series, managing an expanding international spirits brand, preparing for a franchise film, building a Times Square entertainment venue, and executive producing a Hulu documentary about his own life. The schedule of someone who does not know what rest looks like and has quietly decided that is perfectly fine. It is worth noting, because it is easy to take for granted, how rare this kind of sustained activity is for someone who has been at his level for as long as he has. The typical trajectory for a major artist involves gradual deceleration. Major projects get spaced further apart. Public appearances become more selective. Energy gets rationed, because a long career makes enormous demands on a person. 50 Cent shows no visible signs of rationing anything. He is operating at a pace that would be impressive in someone 20 years younger. The explanation is probably the same as every other explanation in this story. He does not know how to stop, and he has not yet found a reason to start. It is April 2026. Curtis James Jackson III is 50 years old. He has 9 bullets still in his body. Some of them have been there for 26 years, and they are going to be there for the rest of his life, every single day. On the set of a television production, in a meeting with a business partner, on stage in Las Vegas, sitting courtside at an NBA game in Sacramento. Those bullets are with him. The shooting that Columbia Records used to justify dropping him is still physically present in the man who survived it. He has built a television franchise that has been running for over a decade and has spawned 4 spin-offs. He has produced a second franchise from scratch. He made $100 million from a water company before he was 35. He has a premium liquor brand, a production company, a nightclub deal in Times Square, and a Hulu documentary about his own life and production at the same time as a documentary about his enemy's downfall is on Netflix. He has a complicated and unresolved relationship with his eldest son. He has never married. He has a second son, Sire, who he has spoken about with genuine warmth. He has not had a commercially dominant rap album in nearly 20 years, and he has never once admitted that the run is over. He grew up in South Jamaica, Queens, where his mother was murdered when he was 8 years old, and nobody was ever held accountable for it. He sold drugs on street corners as a child. He was arrested and sent to a military boot camp at 17. He signed to a major label and got shot 9 times before the album came out and got dropped by the label anyway. He spent 2 years building an audience from nothing. He got the biggest cosign in hip-hop history and made one of the best-selling rap albums ever recorded. He made $100 million from water. He built an empire. He went bankrupt. He built the empire again, in a different shape, in a different medium, at a different scale.
And now he is making a documentary about himself. Of course he is. Who else was going to tell this story the way it deserved to be told? Who else had both the incentive and the resources and the specific understanding of his own narrative to produce the definitive version of it? He is not going to let someone else own the frame. He never has. That is the thesis of this entire life when you step back and look at it from the outside. He controls the frame, not always gracefully, not always ethically, not always in ways that leave the people around him intact, but always, from the mixtapes in 1999 to the Hulu deal in 2026, the narrative is his. The story is his. He is telling it on his terms. From South Jamaica, Queens, with 9 bullets in his body, to a docuseries on Hulu, the boy who lost his mother at 8 and learned that the world was not going to protect him, who decided at 12 that he was going to provide for himself, who decided at 25 that being shot 9 times and blacklisted was not the end, who decided at 31 that a water company was worth more than a recording fee, who decided at 40 that a television show was the next arena, who decided at 50 that the story of his own life was worth a streaming bidding war. Every one of those decisions is the same decision, made with the same fundamental character, by the same person who has been, from the beginning, the most consistent thing in his own story. And that consistency, that absolute, almost exhausting, occasionally infuriating consistency is what you take away from 4 hours of the story. Not the album sales, not the vitamin water number, not the Power franchise or the Las Vegas residency or the Hulu deal. The consistency. The way the kid who decided at 12 years old that he was going to provide for himself, that nobody was coming to save him, that the only resource he could fully rely on was his own willingness to keep moving. The way that kid is still visible in every single thing the 50-year-old man does. The circumstances changed. The resources changed. The arenas changed. The man did not. And that, ultimately, is the most useful thing this story has to offer. Not the specific business moves. The vitamin water deal is interesting, but you cannot replicate it because the exact circumstances that made it possible do not exist anymore. Not the music. You cannot make Get Rich or Die Trying in 2026 because 2003 does not exist anymore. Not even the survival story. Surviving 9 gunshot wounds is not something you can learn from in any practical sense. What you can take is the underlying approach, the refusal to accept the story that other people are writing about you, the willingness to build your own infrastructure when the existing infrastructure rejects you, the understanding that your reputation, your credibility, your audience's trust is a thing you build through consistent behavior over time, not through a single moment or a single hit, the patience to absorb a loss, adjust, and keep going without treating the loss as the end of the story.
Curtis Jackson learned all of those things the hardest possible way, in a neighborhood that was not built for people to succeed, at the hands of a mother's murderer who was never caught, in a car outside his grandmother's house with 9 bullets in his body, in a record label boardroom where someone decided he was not worth the risk, on a sales chart where another artist outsold him by 250,000 copies, in a bankruptcy court where a judge asked about his Instagram. Each of those moments was the kind of thing that writes an ending. For Curtis Jackson, they all turned out to be middles. His name is Curtis James Jackson III. You know him as 50 Cent, and now you know everything. Actually, one more thing, because I think there is something this story is trying to say that goes beyond the biography, beyond the music and the television and the business moves and the beefs. We live in a culture that loves a very specific kind of success story, the kind where someone has natural talent, works hard, catches a break, and rises to the top, clean, linear, deserved. The story where the protagonist is virtuous and the obstacles are external, and the success is proof that the system works for those who put in the effort. The 50 Cent story is not that story. It is messier. The obstacles were not just external. They were also internal, the product of a damaged childhood and a world that offered limited options and survival instincts that were perfectly calibrated for the streets and sometimes badly calibrated for everything else. The success is real, but the path to it left marks on people that cannot be undone. The protagonist is compelling, but not straightforwardly good. The system did not work for him. He worked around it, through it, sometimes against it.
And yet here he is, 50 years old, still standing, still building, still, and this is the part that gets me every time I think about it, still carrying 9 bullets in his body from an attempt on his life at 24 that the justice system never resolved, and treating that not as a tragedy, but as a fact, just another thing that happened, just part of the foundation. Maybe the story this is telling is not about success or failure, or the music industry or the television business, or any of the specific content of his career. Maybe it is about something simpler and harder to name, about what it means to refuse the death that almost came for you, to refuse the industry that discarded you, to refuse the narrative that says your moment has passed, to refuse over and over and over for 50 years, to accept the version of your story that other people are trying to write for you. He has been writing his own story since he was a kid in South Jamaica, with a notebook and a hunger that had no obvious outlet. He is still writing it. The Hulu documentary is just the latest chapter. We will be watching.